Chapter 507. Nyan if. At this point, Chinshi could not help but pause. After hesitating for a moment, he nervously probed. If you have someone you like in the future, you know what it means to like, right? It means that you really want to play with someone every day, and that person also likes to play with you. Will you fall in love early like other students? For parents, this question was indeed a bit awkward. Children were not sensible. Their understanding of early love was naturally very different from the understanding of early love of adults. In fact, for children under the 4th grade to fall in love early, at most it was a hazy good feeling. And this kind of good feeling was very easy to change. The child today liked A, tomorrow it might be B, and the day after tomorrow it might suddenly like C, who got first place in class. If A, B, and C were seen as toys, it was naturally easy to understand this problem. Children were both curious and liked to explore at the same time. Therefore, when encountering this kind of thing, it was best for parents not to be too agitated to the extent of going overboard. Correct guidance was the best way to solve the problem. As the saying goes, it is better to let go than to block. Chinshi tried to use a hypothetical method to let the little girl understand the disadvantages of early love. But what he did not expect was, as soon as he said his hypothesis, the little girl directly shook her head and then replied with a firm expression. No, I won't like anyone, and I won't fall in love with anyone. Hearing this, Chinshi could not help but ask, Are you so sure? Why? Because they are too stupid. I don't like to play with them. Looking at the little girl's expression of disdain, Chinshi suddenly understood. So she thought that her classmates were too stupid, so no one could enter her eyes at all? Although Wanwan and Mingming are also very stupid. But they have always been my best friends, so I don't dislike them. Also, I know what it means to like. If puppy love means two people are together all day long, then if I play with Wanwan and Mingming every day, isn't that also early love? We're not dating. We're good friends. So Dad, your example is wrong. After hearing his daughter's reasonable rebuttal, Chinshi couldn't help but be speechless. But on second thought, it was as if he had heard something happy. After laughing and shaking his head, he stretched out his neck and kissed the little fellow's face heavily. Mua. The little fellow was preoccupied with expressing her views on puppy love. Suddenly, she was ambushed by Chinshi and immediately forgot what she was going to say next. Daddy, you're so annoying. After saying that, the little thing buried its head in Chinshi's shoulder, seemingly a little shy. Silly child, are you shy now? After today's conversation, Chinshi finally realized Nyan was really starting to grow up. Time is always relative. Now let's rewind time to 1 month ago. After a period of hurrying, Changhua and Yiji successfully arrived at the Supreme Palace enclosure on the 3rd day after they set off. Chinshi didn't have the habit of showing off in front of children, so the two of them didn't know that Chinshi had caused a ruckus in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. They also didn't know that the Tuoba family had suffered heavy losses because of it. As the instigators of all this, the two brats only had the chance to visit home after leaving home for almost a year. Thus, just as the cloud-piercing shuttle flew into the sky above Ning Province, Yiji couldn't contain his excitement anymore. He jumped off the cloud-piercing shuttle and flew as fast as he could to the Dongfang family. He had already discussed with Changhua beforehand. Everyone would go back to their own families and find their mothers. 3 days later, they would meet here and head back to Earth together. The 3 great families of Ning Province were the Xianyuan family, the Dongfang family, and the Tuoba family. In terms of status, the two of them actually had very high positions in their families. But it was also because of this that the pressure they faced far exceeded that of their peers. Changhua could be used as an example. His father was Genryo, one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. Since he was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family, Genryo's cultivation naturally wouldn't be weak. In reality, Genryo, who was in the early stage of soul formation, was already more than 800 years old. Immortal cultivators had long lifespans, but when it came to bearing children, they were far inferior to mortals. As the saying goes, the unseen world has its own will. Under the influence of the laws of heaven and earth, the higher one's cultivation, the lower their chances of bearing children. Genrio had 9 sons and 4 daughters in his life. Cheng-Hua was Genrio's youngest child, and at the same time his last child. Cheng-Hua's talent wasn't bad. In addition, Genrio had a child at an old age, so it was inevitable that he would especially spoil this youngest child. Logically speaking, Cheng-Hua should have lived a very comfortable life since he was born in one of the 3 great families of Ning province, and his father was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. After all, he was a rich second generation. But it was a pity. Reality was always slightly different from what outsiders imagined. In reality, Cheng-Hua's life wasn't good at all. Cheng-Hua's mother was called Zhang, and she came from a small family in Ning province. Because of her outstanding appearance, Genrio made an exception and took her in as a concubine. What needed to be understood here was how long a cultivator's life was. If one didn't have someone to accompany them on the long road, wouldn't their life be very lonely? Because of this, cultivators usually viewed status as extremely important. Even though Xianyuan Yuanliang had countless women, other than his first wife, First Madam, the only one who had a proper status with him was the second Madam, Madam Zhang. From this, it could be seen that Zhang was definitely not someone to be trifled with. However, although Zhang's methods were powerful, she was still a woman, so there were many things that Zhang couldn't decide. For example, Cheng-Hua's eldest brother always used the excuse of training as an excuse to often throw Cheng-Hua into an extremely dangerous place, and left him to fend for himself there. And this was the fundamental reason why Cheng-Hua dared to recklessly enter the Tianshu ruins later on. As a mother, Zhang saw everything, but she couldn't think of any way to help her son, who asked Cheng-Hua to only have one big brother left. Both of them were flesh and blood. In addition, his eldest brother always had a reasonable explanation. So Genrio wouldn't help his youngest son at all. Instead, he would think that his eldest son did the right thing. No matter how noble their birth was, cultivators would face all kinds of unexpected difficulties and crises in their lives. If they could make it through, it would be an opportunity. If they couldn't make it through, it would be fate. Everyone was already used to this. Cheng-Hua should have had many brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, most of his brothers and sisters had fallen. Now, only the powerful 5th brother and 8th sister, who had already married into the Dongfang family, were left. Genrio didn't want to be sad, so from the day Cheng-Hua was born, his 5th brother became the eldest brother, and his 8th sister became the second sister. Under normal circumstances, siblings should help each other and complement each other. Cheng-Hua's family was an exception. If one had to use a word to describe the relationship between the 2 brothers, then this word must be, like strangers. Chapter 508. Cheng-Hua's eldest brother was Genyuan Zhengqi, who was over 300 years old this year. Ever since he broke through to Yuanying, Genyuan Zhengqi had been given a position in the family as a steward. He was considered to have officially stepped into the core management of the Xianyuan family. It was important to note that any child with the blood of one of the 3 major families in their veins, regardless of whether they were from the main family or the side family, had to work hard to gain the family's approval. For anyone in the family, status had to be fought for. Since Genyuan Zhengqi was able to step into Yuanying at the age of 300, at this rate, as long as nothing too big happened in the future, he would definitely have the opportunity to successfully inherit Genrio's legacy and become one of the 8 elders. What were the 8 elders? They were second only to one person and above everyone else. Seeing that his eldest son was so promising, Genrio naturally hoped that his youngest son could be as outstanding as his eldest son. Thus, after Cheng-Hua was born, Genrio handed over the task of educating him to Genyuan Zhengqi. And this was the beginning of Cheng-Hua's tragedy. Genyuan Zhengqi didn't seem to like this little brother of his. After all, they weren't born from the same mother. When Cheng-Hua was still an infant, Genyuan Zhengqi used the excuse of cleansing his meridians to soak Cheng-Hua in all sorts of strange potions. He even called it a medicinal bath. Zhang had secretly investigated this so-called medicinal bath. Based on the dregs of the medicine left behind, she could roughly confirm that the medicine inside was poisonous. Because of this, Zhang didn't hesitate to have a big argument with Genyuan Zhengqi. She always felt that Chenghua's half-brother had ulterior motives. He might want to murder Chenghua, so she didn't want Jianyuan Jingqi to get close to Chenghua. Zhang originally wanted to use this opportunity to completely drive Jianyuan Jingqi away from Chenghua. Who would have thought that when Zhenrio heard about this, he would only ask Jianyuan Jingqi to show her the ancient book that recorded the formula of the medicinal bath, and then mercilessly scolded her. This ancient book was painstakingly obtained by Zhengqi from the Jade Clear Cave Heaven. I have already checked it beforehand. The herbs used in the book seem to be poisonous, but in fact the principle of using poison to fight poison is used. Therefore, the effect of the medicine is better than ordinary herbs. Zhengqi is my child, and so is Chenghua. Since they are brothers, why would Jingqi hurt Chenghua for no reason? I think you are measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Chenghua's talent is slightly better than Jingqi's. If he ends up with nothing in the future, don't blame me for not caring about the relationship between husband and wife. Zhenrio was one of the 8 elders in the family, and also the head of the family. His words naturally carried a lot of weight. After this, Zhang lost the right to raise Chenghua. Mother and son could only see each other on certain days. For the rest of the time, Chenghua could only bitterly endure all kinds of inhumane torture in Jianyuan Jingqi. Of course, Xianyuan Jingqi would never torture Chenghua himself. He would only be like a god who was high up in the sky. He would give his younger brother all kinds of death-seeking missions, and he would call it training. Fortunately, no matter how difficult these experiences were, Chenghua still managed to pull through in the end. As for the love and hate entanglement between Chenghua and his older brother, I won't go into too much detail here. Let's get back to the main story first. Today was Zhang's birthday, which was also her 100th birthday. 100 years old. No matter how long a cultivator lived, how many hundred years could they live in their lifetime? What's more, for someone like Zhang who wasn't very talented, there was basically no hope of yuannying in this lifetime. If it had been someone else, they would have definitely thrown a big party when their birthday was coming to an end. Zhenrio originally planned to do this as well. After all, he was one of the 8 elders of the Xianyuan family. Whenever there was a happy occasion in the family, even the head of the family would personally come to congratulate him. But it was a pity. Ever since Zhang found out that Chenghua had entered the Tianshu ruins, she shut herself in her room and refused to see anyone. Zhenrio originally wanted to take advantage of her birthday to comfort her, but he didn't expect that Zhang would mercilessly block him outside the room. Now that Hua Er's life is uncertain as his mother, I really don't have the leisure to do that. Please don't blame me. Zhenrio didn't force his way in, nor did he use his divine sense to probe the situation in the room. This was because he heard a trace of despair in Zhang's voice. That's right. Now that Chenghua's life was uncertain, how could Zhang still smile? Ever since the day she wreaked havoc in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, everyone had a new understanding of the Tianshu ruins. Although the truth wasn't as mysterious as the legends, at least everyone knew that there was at least one supreme being living in there. What's more, this supreme being could even fight the 4 perfected masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven alone. Then with his methods, could it be that he couldn't block the heart flame lamp senses? Therefore, even if Chenghua's heart flame lamp hadn't been extinguished, Zhenrio found it very hard to believe that Chenghua was still alive in this world. Sigh. After a deep sigh, Zhenrio could only silently turn around and leave. In order to not let anyone disturb Zhang, Zhenrio didn't forget to remind the servants not to let anyone take half a step into the courtyard after leaving. Now he could only hope that Zhang could walk out of this shadow as soon as possible. After all, Zhenrio had lived for several hundred years, and was already used to seeing life and death. Therefore, when he learned that Chenghua might never come back, he didn't appear too sad or emotional. It was impossible to say that he wasn't sad. But, what was the use of being sad? As an immortal cultivator, Zhenrio had experienced too many life and death separations in his life. That old heart of his had long been numb. But it was precisely because his heart had long been numb that Zhenrio didn't know at all. This woman who had locked herself in her room all day because of the loss of her son, in such a state of despair, What terrible things would she do? In a dim room, Zhang sat quietly by the bed alone, holding an old rag doll in her hand. This rag doll was personally sewn for Cheng Hua. It was also Cheng Hua's favorite toy when he was young. Perhaps she was thinking of him when she saw it. Zhang gently stroked the rag doll with her fingers as she softly muttered, "Hua, don't worry. Mother has already reached an agreement with the Holy Church. Very soon, they will let Big Brother accompany you to the Tianshu ruins." Her voice was very soft, but the expression on her face was very strange. Sometimes she chuckled, sometimes she was sad. As if she was possessed, it gave people a horrifying and strange feeling. 9 Heaven's Divine Emperor. Chapter 509. The first madam had passed away many years ago, so apart from Genryo, Zhang had the highest status in the family. However, so what if she had a high status? Genryo still thought that Zhang's cultivation was too low, and that she was not talented enough to guide Cheng Hua properly. That was why he had left Cheng Hua in the care of his eldest brother since he was young. But what happened in the end? Now that Cheng Hua's fate was unknown, Zhang naturally took it to heart. She felt that Cheng Hua was forced to his death by his eldest brother and father. Her son was forced to his death, so as Cheng Hua's mother, how could she continue to remain calm? One had to know that when a woman went crazy, she would not recognize her own family. To Zhang, although the Xianyuan family was huge, there was nothing in it that she was reluctant to part with. Cheng Hua's trip to the Tianshu ruins could only end in death. As a result, Madame Zhang's heart was filled with hatred. She hated everyone, including Genryo. Just as she had said before, if something really happened to Cheng Hua, she would make sure that the entire Xianyuan family was buried with him. The Holy Church had already responded, so Zhang believed that her plan would come to fruition soon. Zhang silently planned. At this moment, a figure completely ignored Genryo's ban and forced his way into her courtyard. Genryo had set up a restriction on the entrance of the courtyard, allowing only people to leave and not enter. Thus, this person could only use all his strength to break through the restriction and try to force his way in. Soon, this commotion alerted the guards in the courtyard. Seeing that the guards were rushing over, the intruder turned around and shouted at them excitedly, "Open the restriction. I want to see my mother." As soon as he appeared, the guards were stunned. He saw that this person was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt on his upper body and a pair of ripped jeans on his lower body. Coupled with his short hair, he looked somewhat out of place with the surrounding environment. His attire was a little strange. After careful observation, the guards finally dared to confirm that the person in front of them was the long-missing second young master. Second young master really came back. What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Seeing that everyone was hesitating, Cheng Hua no longer bothered with them. He looked around and found that the secret key to open the restriction was on one of the guards' waist. He walked over to the person and snatched the key. The guard instinctively wanted to stop him, but he was instantly intimidated by his fierce glare. How could this person not be the second young master? Seeing Cheng Hua swagger into the courtyard, the guard in charge of keeping the secret key seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but shiver, and then with a face full of excitement he shouted, "Quick, report to the master. Second young master is back." Cheng Hua's return was like a stone heavily smashed into the water. As the restriction was opened, Zhang finally heard the commotion outside. She frowned and opened the door. Just as she was about to scold him, she unexpectedly saw the figure that made her worried the moment she raised her head. "Mother, I'm back." When Cheng Hua saw that Zhang had come out, he immediately knelt on the ground and bowed. At that moment, Zhang felt as if she was struck by lightning. She had an expression of disbelief on her face, as she stood there in a daze for a full 3 seconds. Then she subconsciously cried out in shock, "Hua! Mother, it's me. I'm back. Hua, it's really you? Come here quickly, let mother take a good look at you." The scene of mother and son reuniting after such a long time was really touching. Zhang quickly walked forward and helped Cheng Hua up. Then, the mother and son hugged each other tightly. They were so emotional that they couldn't speak. After a long while, Zhang finally suppressed the excitement in her heart. Then, with a concerned expression, she asked, "Fortunately, the immortal emperor protected me. I didn't have to send off my son just now." After experiencing so many things on earth, Cheng Hua had matured a lot. He had learned many things from Chen Shi, including kinship. How could Zhang Zhang not treat him as well as how Chen Shi treated Nian Nian? How great and selfless was this kind of love? Every time he thought of this, Cheng Hua couldn't wait to rush back to the Supreme Palace enclosure. He only hoped that he could use his filial piety to comfort his mother's silent concern for him all these years. As the saying goes, a tree wants to be still, but the wind won't stop. A child wants to be raised, but his parents won't wait. Now he was finally back. "I'm unfilial and made mother worry." It's fine, it's fine. It's good that you're back." Zhang Zhang looked at Cheng Hua up and down. After making sure that he was not hurt, she asked happily, "Hua, or didn't you go to the Tianshu ruins?" This. Cheng Hua naturally understood what Zhang Zhang was worried about. So he immediately smiled and replied, "Mother, I came back especially to celebrate your birthday." Zhang Zhang seemed to want to say something else. Seeing this, Cheng Hua directly held her arm and said with a smile, "Let's go. I'll help you back to the house first. Then I'll tell you what happened in detail." The mother and son returned to the room. Then, under Zhang Zhang's incredulous gaze, Cheng Hua recounted his experience during this period of time in detail. "You mean, after you met Mr. Chen, not only did he not kill you, and he even took the initiative to accept you as his disciple?" After listening to Cheng Hua's story, the expression on Zhang Zhang's face was very interesting. Mr. Chen's prestige was now a gold-plated signboard in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Everyone said that the Tianshu ruins were a forbidden area, and that trespassers would die. Who would have thought that Cheng Hua not only did not lose his life after trespassing into the Tianshu ruins, but also profited from the disaster and formed a good relationship with Mr. Chen. Mother, you might not understand. Mr. Chen did not accept me as his disciple. He only let me live in his house. When he was free, he would give me a few pointers." In order not to worry his mother, Cheng Hua concealed most of the facts. He did not mention Qin Xueqing at all, so Zhang Zhang mistakenly thought that he had been accepted as a disciple by Chen Shi. Even if it was only a few pointers, it was still pointers from Ji Zun. Mr. Chen is a peerless master who can defeat the 4 perfected masters alone. "Hua, you've bumped into a great opportunity." Zhang Zhang was very excited. Who knew what kind of great luck Cheng Hua had had to be lucky enough to become Ji Zun's disciple? Looking at her son who was becoming more mature and steady, Zhang Zhang could not help but smile from the bottom of her heart. But immediately after, she seemed to have suddenly thought of something terrible, and a trace of worry flashed across her eyes. Cheng Hua's return was indeed a great thing. But what should she do with the Holy Church? Unilaterally break the contract? Would she dare? Thinking of this, Zhang Zhang's heart could not help but sink, and she instantly became a little worried. Cheng Hua was immersed in the joy of reuniting with his mother, so he did not notice the strange look on Zhang Zhang's face. He thought that Zhang Zhang was blaming him for trespassing on the Tianshu ruins, so he was thinking of something to say to make his mother happy. But at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the courtyard. A large group of people was seen hurrying towards Zhang Zhang's room. The leader was Zhenrio. Other than Cheng Hua's elder brother, Zhenyuan Zhengqi, who was with him, there was also the current head of the Xianyuan family, Xianyuan Wuwang. Chapter 510. Outside the courtyard, the head of the family and the 8 elders arrived together. From this, it could be seen how shocking the news of Cheng Hua coming back alive from the Tianshu ruins was. Where is he? Xianyuan Wuwang looked to be about 60 years old. He was wearing an exquisite dark green robe with a simple jade pendant hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was the one with the highest status in the group. This was Zhenrio's courtyard. Although Xianyuan Wuwang was the head of the family, the servants did not recognize him. After all, there was no television in the Supreme Palace enclosure. The guard didn't know Xianyuan Wuwang, but he vaguely recognized a few of the 8 elders. Therefore, when he heard Xianyuan Wuwang's seemingly random question, the guard was stunned. He didn't know how to answer at all. Seeing this, Genryo immediately walked out from the back of the group and quickly scolded in a low voice. Fool, the head of the family is asking you a question. Why aren't you answering? Where did Changhua go? After hearing the head of the family scolding, the guard replied with a look of realization. Master, the second young master has been staying in the second madam's room ever since he came back. He did not go anywhere. All right, get out of here. The Xianyuan family was very large. If one had to describe it, the Xianyuan family could be considered a county. The head of the family was the county head, and the 8 elders were the mayors of the various towns. Now that the county head was here, it was understandable that the servants were slightly negligent. Although Genryo was very impressive all day, in front of the head of the family, he was very much like a bootlicker who only knew how to nod his head and bow his head. And this was the specialty of the Supreme Palace enclosure. That was the feudal hierarchy. Under the rules of this system, the head of the family's authority could not be challenged. Fortunately, Xianyuan Wuang seemed to be in a good mood today. Therefore, after hearing the guard's answer, Xianyuan Wuang did not show any intention of blaming him. After casually waving his hand, he strode into the courtyard. When his entourage saw this, they all followed behind him and swarmed into the courtyard like a swarm of bees. At this time, Changhua also heard the commotion outside the house. After signaling his mother not to get up, he walked to the door and pushed it open. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on him. This was Genryo's youngest son, Xianyuan Changhua, a little brat who hadn't even had a coronation ceremony. If not for the fact that Changhua had returned alive from the Tianshu ruins, most of the people present would have forgotten that Genryo had such an outstanding son. Why aren't you kneeling down? According to the customs of the Supreme Palace enclosure, a crowning ceremony would be held at the age of 20, which was the so-called coming-of-age ceremony. Before the crowning ceremony was held, juniors like Changhua did not even have the right to step into the ancestral hall of the clan. In the past, during the clan meeting, Changhua often ran outside with his peers to peek at the meeting. Therefore, he knew the head of the family and the other elders. Therefore, after hearing Genryo's reminder, Changhua immediately stopped on the steps and then bowed to the people in the courtyard. He clasped his fist and bowed. Changhua is here to greet the head of the family, father, and elders. There was nothing wrong with Chenghua's words. However, his behavior was obviously very problematic. In front of the head of the family as a junior, how could Changhua not kneel? This was a great crime of disrespect. Genryo saw all of this, but as a father, he could only be anxious at the side and did not dare to say anything to remind him. Could it be that he had to remind the head of the family to punish Changhua for his great disrespect? Genryo was very anxious in his heart. That was because he did not know that Changhua had changed. Changhua had been by Qinshi's side for too long, and had also lived for a long time in modern society. Therefore, unknowingly, Chenghua's understanding of this world had undergone a great change. The two of them are also human, everyone is equal. It's just a meal, what's the big deal? Come, sit down and eat together, try my cooking. Qin Shiweqing did not allow the two of them to take half a step into the inner courtyard, but Chen Shi opened his mouth and let the two of them directly sit at the dining table. This was just a small matter, but this small matter left an extremely deep impression on Changhua. From the daily diet to the leisure time, Chen Shi's every move affected him, and Yiji almost all the time. The reason why they did not notice anything unusual in the past was that the two of them had not returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure yet. It was also because of this that when Changhua returned this time, he realized that he seemed to be somewhat out of tune with the things around him. It was not that he did not know etiquette. It was purely that he did not want to kneel. Why are you kneeling? Stand up, haven't you heard that men have gold under their knees? Stand up straight for me. At this moment, Chenghua's mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts. So much so that he even started to miss Earth. Xianyuan Wuang did not know what Changhua was thinking. Moreover, he did not know what Changhua was thinking at all. Yuan Liang, lead the way. Let's talk somewhere else. Xianyuan Wuang came here today with a purpose, so he did not want to waste too much time on these trivial matters. At his command, The master let Genryo lead everyone to sit in the main hall of the courtyard one by one. After that, in front of everyone present, Changhua repeated everything he had just said to Zhang. His reaction was more or less the same as Zhang's. After everyone heard that Changhua had been living in Mr. Chen's house all this time, the expressions on their faces were as interesting as it could be. After Changhua roughly recounted his experience, he stood to the side and quietly waited for the master to ask questions. After pondering for a while, the master frowned and asked softly, "In other words, Mr. Chen has already taken you in?" It was no wonder that everyone understood this. After all, the Supreme Palace enclosure was not Earth. Other than Chen Shi, who would take a captive in their own house and provide them with good food and drinks. Master, Mr. Chen did not take me in as a disciple. He just let me live in his house and gave me a few pointers when he was free. Changhua tried his best to explain. Hearing this, Xianyuan Wuang replied with a look of sudden realization. "I think it's because your cultivation levels are too low. Mr. Chen was afraid that you two would embarrass him, so he didn't give you a master and disciple status. If that's the case, you really can't claim to be his disciple." As soon as this was said, the 8 elders suddenly seemed to have figured something out. They could not help but nod in agreement. "Master, you're right." Seeing that this misunderstanding was getting bigger and bigger, Changhua hesitated for a moment, but in the end he forced himself to swallow the words that had already been on the tip of his tongue. Anyway, there was nothing wrong with being Mr. Chen's disciple. Since everyone had to understand it this way, he could only let it be. At worst, he would go back and explain it to Mr. Chen properly. Anyway, he did not use Mr. Chen's name to swindle people everywhere. Changhua believed that he had a clear conscience, so he did not dwell on this issue any longer. Since Xianyuan Wuwang had asked what he wanted to ask and understood what he needed to understand, Changhua guessed that it was time for them to leave. So he tactfully excused himself and left the main hall. Of course, he did not go far. Instead, he waited silently outside the house so that he could send the elders off later. Changhua stood outside the door and waited, bored to death. However, at this moment, his name suddenly rang out in the main hall. "Yuanliang, you really have a good son. This child is called Changhua, right? What are his birth characters? Is he betrothed now?" "Coincidentally, I have a niece. She's 16 years old and has yet to be betrothed. I wonder, Yuanliang, are you willing to become my in-laws?" At that moment, Changhua felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. Before Genryo could even open his mouth to reply, he rushed into the main hall as if he had been electrocuted. Then in front of the master he shouted at everyone, "No!" Chapter 511. No. Chenghua's sudden intrusion instantly interrupted everyone's conversation. Looking at his nervous and agitated expression, the patriarch did not directly reprimand him for his lack of manners. Instead, he asked with a smile, "Why not?" At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Changhua. That's right, why not? As the cultivation of an immortal cultivator increased, the probability of having children would gradually decline. Therefore, immortal cultivators would usually try to get married and have children as soon as possible before they made a major breakthrough in their cultivation, so as to avoid the tragedy of having no one to send them off in the future. Even young people like Changhua, who had not yet had a coronation ceremony, were mostly already married at this age. The meaning of life was to reproduce and multiply. In the words of the ancient people, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and the worst was to have no descendants. Because his eldest brother, Genyuan Jingqi, had already gotten married and had 2 sons, Genryo did not urge Changhua to get married and have children. He had originally planned to wait until after Chenghua's coronation ceremony to find a good family for Changhua. Who would have thought that, after Chenghua's trip to the Tianshu ruins, he had become a hot commodity in everyone's eyes. In addition to a few elders who expressed their desire to become in-laws with him, it seemed that even the patriarch had this intention. Since ancient times, regardless of the social system, marriage was the most common way to establish relations. Since Changhua had the title of supreme disciple, wouldn't a marriage alliance with him mean that they would suddenly have a huge backer behind them? Even if they accidentally provoked the 4 great spiritual masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven in the future, the 4 great spiritual masters would probably be a little more lenient on account of Great Supreme Master Chen. Therefore, even if Cheng Hua's behavior was a little rude, no one had the intention to blame him. Instead, they smiled and sized up Cheng Hua. After hearing the patriarch's question, Cheng Hua could not help but be stunned. He did not know why he objected to this suggestion. After all, cultivators were different from mortals. It would not be an exaggeration to describe the life of an immortal cultivator as a wandering and magnificent life. For immortal cultivators, the concept of home was more like an organization that they could rely on, since a man could have 3 wives and 4 concubines. In other words, a woman could naturally have 3,000 male companions. The so-called love was stronger than gold and unswerving until death. This kind of thing did not work in the Supreme Palace enclosure at all. Cheng Hua hesitated, not knowing how to answer the patriarch's question. Seeing this, the clan head laughed and said, "Could it be that you already have someone in mind? Which family are you from? If you don't mind, this old man can be a matchmaker for you." After hearing the patriarch's words, Cheng Hua couldn't help but think of a cold and aloof figure. However, as that figure became clearer and clearer in his mind, Cheng Hua couldn't help but shudder. Then he quickly replied, "Thank you for your concern, patriarch. It's not like I have someone in mind. It's just that. At this point, Cheng Hua couldn't help but pause for a moment. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he couldn't help but quickly add, "It's just that I haven't reached the age of 1 yet. That's why I haven't considered the personal matters of my children before. Now that I've suddenly heard the elders mention this matter, I can't help but feel a little uneasy in my heart. I hope the elders won't blame me." Since they were talking about marriage, Cheng Hua naturally had to act like a junior. Anyway, they were all family. There was nothing wrong with him calling himself the grandson in front of the patriarch. Using the reason that he was underage, Cheng Hua tactfully rejected the good intentions of the elders. But what he didn't expect was, after hearing his words, the patriarch still laughed and said, "The coronation ceremony is just a kind of ceremony. It just so happens that tomorrow is the 15th of the first lunar month. When the time comes, come to the ancestral temple, and this old man will personally crown you. How about it?" Because there were too many people in the Xianyuan family, the coronation ceremony didn't happen immediately after the age of 20. Instead, it had to be done in batches. Usually, it would be chosen at an auspicious time, and the elders and deacons would perform the ceremony for the juniors. The higher the status of the person in the family, the more grand the coronation ceremony would be. For Cheng Hua to have the patriarch personally crown him in the ancestral temple was already a privilege that only the direct bloodline of the Xianyuan family could enjoy. Genrio relied on his cultivation to become one of the 8 elders. So in terms of bloodline, Cheng Hua was far from being qualified to enter the ancestral temple. Therefore, it could be said that the patriarch of the Xianyuan family was giving Chunxi enough face. Seeing that the patriarch had said so, the elders all nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Cheng Hua seemed to be a little unwilling to give up and said, "When I left Tianshu, I promised Mr. Chun that I would only be back for 7 days. So this marriage," Cheng Hua struggled hard. However, before he could finish his words, the patriarch interrupted him. 7 days? That's enough. When your wedding is over, I'll send someone to escort you all the way back to Tianshu. How about that? Let's settle this matter then. Yuan Liang, I'll leave this matter to you. Tomorrow morning, I'll perform the coronation ceremony for your good son at the ancestral temple." There was no room for negotiation at all. After saying this, the patriarch left the courtyard with his people. Only a dumbfounded Cheng Hua was left behind, as well as his excited old father. Coronation ceremony marriage. At the same time, the status of the family rose sharply. Ever since Cheng Hua and Yiji returned home, everything they experienced was so similar. The Tuoba family had already fallen. So, how could the Xianyuan family and the Dongfang family, who were also the 3 major families of Ningzhou, not be prepared at all? No matter what the relationship between the 2 of them and Mr. Chun. In short, It would not be wrong to please the two of them. Therefore, after the two of them went through a series of friendly greetings, they were pushed into the ancestral temple in a daze under the gaze of thousands of people. From the moment the two patriarchs personally held the coronation ceremony for the two of them, Changhua and Yiji officially set foot on the peak of their lives. It felt like a dream. Everything came so suddenly. In a daze, the two teenagers were in their own ancestral temples. At the same time, they put on the red and black crowns that were unique to adults. The ceremony is complete. Bow to the ancestors. As the ceremony was completed, there was a burst of lively cheers outside the ancestral temples of the Xianyuan and Dongfang families. People couldn't help but cheer for the crowns. It was as if there was only joy left in the world. However, no one would have thought, just as the two of them were about to complete their coronation ceremony, an earth-shattering sound suddenly came from the horizon. Boom. In an instant, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Evil wind blew. Chapter 5:12. The sudden turn of events alarmed everyone. The sun was still shining brightly earlier, but in the blink of an eye, the sky in the distance had become so gloomy that it was about to rain. Seeing that a storm was about to come, the people outside the ancestral temple could not help but whisper to each other. What's going on? The weather is so abnormal. Did something big happen in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven? Like the Great World, there were no stars near the Supreme Palace enclosure, so the changes in the weather and the movement of the sun and moon were all controlled by the formation. The core of the Supreme Palace enclosure's formation was in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. Now that the weather had suddenly changed, the first reaction of the people present was to guess if something had happened in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. Thick black clouds covered the entire sky, and the sky was as dark as ink that had dripped into water. Looking from afar, the black clouds surged over one after another, like the ferocious and terrifying faces of monsters. Like the low growl of a vicious dog before it pounced on its prey. The thunder in the sky accumulated power for a while before it suddenly burst out with an earth-shattering sound. Rumble. Rumble. In an instant, the thunder rumbled and the wind howled. In front of such a terrifying scene, no one had any intention of hiding. Instead, they all looked up at the distant sky. In the ancestral temple, the moment Xianyuan Wuwang heard the thunder, he stopped the warning and blessing he was about to say to Changhua. Instead, he quickly walked out of the ancestral temple with a serious face. When the 8 elders saw this, they all followed behind him and walked out of the ancestral temple. Changhua was supposed to be the main character of today's ceremony. However, the moment the thunder sounded, he completely became a side character that no one cared about. Seeing that no one cared about him, Changhua did not bother to care about the complicated etiquette. He directly took off the white crown on his head and hugged it in his arms. Then he quietly moved to Genryo's side. Father, did something big happen? The patriarch and the 8 grand elders stood proudly on the steps facing the demonic wind. After hearing Chenghua's question, Genryo frowned and glared at him. He then quickly scolded him in a low voice, "Silence." "Oh, okay." Changhua had never seen such a scene before. Therefore, when he heard Genryo's reprimand, he could only shrink his head in confusion and obediently stand behind the crowd, not daring to make any noise. Rumble. Rumble. The sound of rolling thunder reverberated in the air. One after another, there was not a single moment of rest. It lasted for about 2 minutes before the deafening thunder gradually subsided. What's going on? Like Changhua, most of the young people outside the ancestral temple had blank looks on their faces. They had no idea what had just happened. Changhua stole a glance at his father. He realized that his father's expression was somewhat strange. There was a hint of nervousness, excitement, and even a hint of excitement. Could it be something good was about to happen? In the past, Changhua would not have the right to stand on the steps outside the ancestral temple. Today he had a rare opportunity to do so. Naturally, he wanted to experience the feeling of standing at the top. However, at this moment, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders, who were standing at the front, suddenly knelt on one knee and shouted in unison, "Yes, Shunren." Seeing this, Changhua was stunned. This was because he had no idea what had just happened. Seeing the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders kneeling on the ground, Cheng Hua was stunned for a moment. He could only follow suit and kneel down immediately. However, the moment he knelt down, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders stood up again. This was great. Cheng Hua did not know whether he should kneel or stand now. Forget it. This is fate. It can't be changed. Yuan Liang, explain to this child first. If Mr. Chen wants to blame someone in the future, I don't think he will be the one to blame. The dark clouds in the sky did not disperse, and the thunder stopped. The patriarch of the Xianyuan family looked at Cheng Hua with a complicated expression and shook his head gently. Then he led the rest of the elders back to the ancestral temple. Explain? Explain what? Hearing this, Cheng Hua could not help but feel confused. He was about to ask when Genrio's voice suddenly rang in his head. It was a voice transmission. His father was transmitting a voice transmission to him. After listening to Genrio's explanation, Cheng Hua finally understood what had just happened. So, the thunder just now was not a natural phenomenon. It was caused by the thunder drum of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. The so-called thunder drum was a special method used by the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven to transmit information to the various forces in the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was roughly equivalent to the radio station on Earth, and it was the encrypted kind. Only when one's cultivation reached a certain level could they hear the message that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven wanted to transmit from the thunder. The reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven suddenly sounded the thunder drum today was completely because a grand event that happened once in 100 years was coming. What was a grand event? The meeting of the 3 enclosures was a grand event. Cheng Hua had heard many rumors about the 3 enclosures since he was young. The so-called 3 enclosures were the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure, and the Heavenly Market enclosure. Legend had it that a long time ago, the 3 enclosures were originally a complete planet. Later on, something happened that caused the planet to be torn apart and turned into the 3 enclosures of today. Like the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure, and the Heavenly Market enclosure, were also plate-shaped landmasses that had been drifting in this vast universe for thousands of years. Because there were no stars to guide them, there was no trace of the 3 enclosures' whereabouts. The Supreme Palace enclosure was now near the solar system. Perhaps the Supreme Palace enclosure was still on the other side of the Milky Way 100,000 years ago. The 3 enclosures would meet once every 100 years. And the principle of its operation was still unknown. According to the speculation of a senior expert in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, the reason why the 3 enclosures would meet at regular intervals should be related to the arrangements left behind by the ancient powerhouses. In other words, the 3 enclosures were still hiding some shocking secrets that had not been discovered by anyone. In order to uncover this secret, since the establishment of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, its successive sect masters had been secretly searching for the truth. After various efforts, they finally found a clue. This clue came from Great Illusionary Land. Cheng Hua knew about the 3 enclosures, but he had never heard of the Great Illusionary Land. Therefore, after hearing this term, he could not help but interrupt Genrio and ask directly, "Father, I still don't understand what you mean. This Great Illusionary Land. What does it have to do with me?" Hearing this, a meaningful smile suddenly appeared on Genrio's face. He reached out and patted Cheng Hua's shoulder, then whispered in Cheng Hua's ear, "Hua, prepare well, your opportunity is here." Chapter 513. For a junior like Cheng Hua, the Great Illusionary Land was an extremely unfamiliar term. However, for existences like Genrio and even the Xianyuan family head, the Great Illusionary Land was a good place that symbolized opportunities and fortuitous encounters. Although the Great Illusionary Land was a specific name, it did not have a specific address. That was because the address it appeared at every time was not fixed. The Great Illusionary Land would only appear briefly in a thick fog on the day when the 3 enclosures converged. Every 100 years, the 3 enclosures would gradually get closer and more or less join together under the influence of an unknown force. Just like Asia, America, and Europe, if a sea was filled in between the 3 enclosures, then one could roughly see its original appearance when looking from afar in the starry sky. Once upon a time, it was also a complete planet. Every time the three enclosures converged, the fluctuation of the spirit energy of heaven and earth would become unusually intense, so much so that the spirit energy would gradually form a fog that would gradually cover the entire sky. At this time, one only needed to follow the spirit energy all the way. The place with the densest spirit energy would be the place where the great illusionary land appeared. Unlike the unknown dangers of the Tianshu ruins, the great illusionary land had real benefits. Genryo had a deep understanding of this problem. After all, if he had not been lucky enough to obtain the qualifications to enter the great illusionary land and obtain many benefits from it, then Genryo, who was only from a collateral bloodline, would not have been able to sit in the position of the 8 great elders. At this point, it was necessary to first mention the so-called social resources and class consolidation. In fact, whether it was Earth or the great illusionary land, except for some lucky people who were favored by the heavens, it was actually very difficult for ordinary people to climb from the bottom of society to the top of society. The great illusionary land did not have a college entrance examination, so the great illusionary land was the only way for everyone to reach the top in one step. Once one entered the great illusionary land, all the opportunities and fortuitous encounters were in front of one's eyes. But it was a pity. The great illusionary land could only allow 3,000 people to enter at a time. 3,000 people sounded like a lot. However, if it was placed in the entire great illusionary land, this number was too small. Just Ning State alone had the Xianyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families, as well as many slightly weaker mid-size families. Moreover, besides the Ning prefecture, there were still 8 other prefectures in the Supreme Palace enclosure that weren't inferior to the Ning prefecture at all. Since everyone wanted to go in and get a share of the pie, then these 3,000 spots naturally needed to be properly distributed. Thus, with the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven taking the lead, the slots were accurately allocated to the various forces according to their overall strength. The thunderclap drum earlier was actually an announcement to the various great powers about the number of slots they would be able to obtain this time. This was the fundamental reason why Chung Hua had never heard of the existence of the great illusionary land before. The quota was limited. Therefore, the fewer people who knew about the existence of the great illusionary realm, the better. Otherwise, wouldn't those bumpkins from small families rebel against the heavens and swarm into the great illusionary realm to change their fates? Therefore, it could be said that this was a carnival for the upper class of the Supreme Palace enclosure, and it had nothing to do with the general public. It was probably because the Tuoba family had suffered a heavy blow a few days ago. So during the distribution this time, the Xianyuan family and the Dongfang family were both given 3 slots, one more than before. Regarding this, the Xianyuan family patriarch was naturally overjoyed, so he immediately returned to the ancestral temple and used the excuse of inspecting the cultivation progress of his clansmen as an excuse to launch a large clan meeting that involved the entire Xianyuan family. Although it was called a large clan meeting, it was actually a martial arts competition. Anyone whose cultivation was above the Golden Core realm and below the Yuanying realm could sign up. As long as one obtained the top 3, they would be allowed to enter the great illusionary realm. What needed to be mentioned here was, there was no requirement to enter the great illusionary realm. Even the Yuanying and soul formation cultivators could enter at will. However, as long as one soul formation cultivator entered the great illusionary realm, then the 3,000 spots would immediately be reduced to 2,000, or even less. According to past experience, it was basically certain that the benefits of entering the great illusionary realm with 3,000 Golden Core cultivators were the greatest. Therefore, the Golden Core cultivators became the key targets of the various forces. Only the strongest among them were qualified to enter the great illusionary realm. Chung Hua's cultivation was only at the middle stage of the Golden Core realm. Logically speaking, he was not qualified to know the inside story in advance. Considering that his master was the great Supreme Chun, the patriarch could not help but place high hopes on him. After all, he was the disciple of the Supreme Chun. Although his cultivation was slightly lower with his actual combat ability, he should not be too bad, right? However, Nobody would have thought. After hearing Genrio's words, Changhua said hesitantly, "Father, can I not participate?" "What?" Genrio looked as if he had seen a ghost. It should be noted that the reason why Chenghua's elder brother did not enter the Great Illusionary Realm back then was that there was no third spot, so he could only stay in the top 3. Now that there was an extra spot, Changhua actually wanted to give it up directly? Was there a mistake? Thinking of this, Genrio only felt a surge of anger in his heart rushing to his head. However, considering that this matter could not be forced, after taking a deep breath, Genrio forced himself to calm down and said, "Why don't you want to participate? Mr. Chen only gave me 7 days. Seeing his father's unfriendly expression, Changhua could only answer honestly, "After 7 days, I must return to Tianshu. Otherwise, with Mr. Chen's temperament, it's very likely that he will personally come to the Supreme Palace enclosure to ask me to return." After hearing the 3 words Mr. Chen, Genrio's eyelids twitched obviously. With the Tuoba family as an example, nobody dared to provoke Mr. Chen in Tianshu. However, was this really going to be a waste of this opportunity? You have to think carefully. Some people are willing to waste 100 years and force themselves to stay in this realm with the purpose of exploring the Great Illusionary Land. Although you are a disciple of a supreme being, what Mr. Chen can give you may not be as much as what the Great Illusionary Land can give you. When the 4 words Great Illusionary Land were mentioned, Genrio's face clearly flashed with a strange light. However, due to some unspoken agreement, he could not tell Changhua what exactly was in the Great Illusionary Land. Moreover, "Are you so sure that you can easily win the first place and obtain a spot to enter the Great Illusionary Land?" After hearing Genrio say this, Changhua was stunned for a moment. That's right. Ever since he found out that he had to compete to obtain a spot, Chenghua's first reaction was that he could not participate. Otherwise, if he did not return to Tianshu on time, Mr. Chen would definitely be angry. In Chenghua's subconscious mind, as long as he participated in the clan meeting, then he would definitely be able to defeat everyone and successfully obtain the qualification to enter the Great Illusionary Land. He seemed to be a little too confident. Chapter 514. Due to the lack of time, the Patriarch immediately announced the start of the Great Clan meeting after receiving the news from the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. This was a grand event that concerned the future of the Xian Yuan family. In this grand event, regardless of whether it was the Xian Yuan family's collateral bloodline, or the relatives who were related to the Xian Yuan family through marriage, or even some criminals who had violated the family rules, regardless of birth or background, as long as one's cultivation was above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, one would be qualified to participate in the Great Clan meeting. Of course, most people did not know what the Great Clan meeting meant, because the Great Illusionary Realm was too far away for them. But even so, everyone wanted to do their best in this Great Clan meeting, and strive to get a good ranking. This grand event was not only related to the Great Illusionary Realm, but also related to everyone's status in the family. Just like how ancient emperors would always pardon the world before they ascended the throne, at this moment, it did not matter whether one was born poor or guilty. As long as they could get a good ranking in the Great Clan meeting, they could use this opportunity to reverse their previous fate. It could be said that this was the true meaning. The fish leaped over the dragon's gate, and the sky was vast. Therefore, the Great Clan meeting was actually equivalent to Wuxia's college entrance exam. It was even fairer than the college entrance exam. Everything depended on one's strength. Qin Xueqing had never been to the Great Palace enclosure, so she did not know how much time would be wasted on the journey from Earth to the Great Palace enclosure. The so-called 7-day deadline was just something she said casually. Regarding this, Chen Shi was more magnanimous. Considering the long journey, when Changhua and Yiji left, he even very considerately reminded them that the 7-day deadline would start from the day they reached home. Today was the 2nd day after Chenghua's return. He originally wanted to go home and accompany his mother, but he did not expect that as soon as he got home, his schedule would be packed. He really did not have a moment to rest. Under Genrio's constant persuasion, Changhua finally signed up for the Great Clan meeting after some hesitation. After all, It was rare for the clan gathering to be held, so he wanted to use this opportunity to see how much he had improved. If he didn't make any progress, he really wouldn't have the face to see Qin Shi. Under the constant urging of the patriarch, the efficiency of the stewards in the clan instantly rose to the highest level. Therefore, in less than half a day's time, this highly anticipated clan gathering ushered in its first competition. Unlike many of the spectators, Cheng Hua did not show any excitement on his face. Instead, he stood beside the ring with a calm expression, silently watching the two parties fighting on the ring. It was as if everything had nothing to do with him. What we need to take note of here is, although the entry requirements were limited to those above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, there was no age limit. The strength of an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 100 years, and an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 500 years were naturally incomparable. Because of this, many of the old fellows who had been cultivating bitterly for their entire lives, but were still unable to enter the Yuanying realm, were extremely excited when they heard that the clan leader was going to hold a clan meeting. As long as they could achieve a certain result in the meeting, the clan would definitely notice them. At that time, wouldn't the Yuanying stage be just around the corner? Everyone wanted to do their best for their own future. So the ruthlessness of this clan meeting was far beyond everyone's expectations. Perhaps it was because they wanted to eliminate the weak as soon as possible. Therefore, in the previous few competitions, there was no real sense of parity. Instead, most of the time, it was peak Aurus Core stage cultivators against early Aurus Core stage cultivators. Such a deliberate arrangement not only ensured that the peak Aurus Core stage cultivators could enter the final round with the strongest form, but also eliminated the weak as quickly as possible. Why not? However, what was surprising was that, even if it was always early Aurus Core stage cultivators against peak Aurus Core stage cultivators, there had never been a situation where the early Aurus Core stage cultivators gave up without a fight. There were even a few times when the early Aurus Core stage cultivators almost made a comeback. So what if they were peak Aurus Core stage cultivators? It was just a battle. What was there to be afraid of? Regardless of their cultivation level, everyone gave it their all in order to obtain a better ranking for themselves. If it wasn't for the clan meeting's explicit prohibition against self-detonating magic treasures, it was estimated that the arena would have been filled with crackling sounds. When night fell, Cheng Hua finally welcomed his first battle. His cultivation was at the middle Aurus Core stage. Now that even he was on the stage, it meant that the early Aurus Core stage cultivators had basically been eliminated, and it was time for the middle Aurus Core stage cultivators. Cheng Hua's opponent was an elder from a collateral branch. Because the news of Cheng Hua going to the Tianshu ruins was not publicized, most people did not know that he now had another identity. But even if he did not have the identity of the supreme disciple, Cheng Hua was still Genryo's second son. So when he just appeared, it caused a big commotion. The patriarch seemed to be very interested in Cheng Hua's experience during this period, so he wanted to see what exactly he had learned under Qin Shi. Therefore, after hearing the news of Cheng Hua's appearance, the patriarch immediately led the 8 elders to the arena where Cheng Hua was. In the arena, Cheng Hua and the elder stood facing each other. The elder did not know Cheng Hua, but he had learned about Cheng Hua's identity from the onlookers, so he was extremely polite as soon as he came up. "I'm older than you, young master. Now that I have the honor of exchanging pointers with you, please make your move first." As he spoke, the old man took out his Dharma treasure. It was a simple long saber, and its rank was a 3rd-grade spirit treasure. At first glance, one could tell that it was a collection of the elders for many years. If Cheng Hua's phoenix perch scorched tail box was still there, then this long saber was naturally not a good item. According to the usual practice, the two sides should introduce their magic treasures before exchanging pointers. Therefore, the elder roughly introduced his long saber. He estimated that with Cheng Hua's identity, his 3rd-grade spirit treasure would not be good enough for him. Who would have thought after hearing his introduction? Cheng Hua shook his head directly, and then said calmly, "I won't use my magic treasure. Please make your move." At that moment, not only was the elder on the arena stunned, but even Genryo, who was flying in the sky, was also surprised. How could this child be so arrogant? Not using his phoenix perch scorched tail box, he actually wanted to fight against a peak golden elixir with his bare hands? Could a supreme disciple be so arrogant? Regarding this question, Genryo had wronged Changhua. Because he did not know, not using magic treasures had long been a tradition of the Sai courtyard. The one who really made Changhua decide not to rely on magic treasures to fight was actually not Qin Xueqing, who had entered the Dao through martial arts, but Chen Shi. As the saying went, loud voices come from afar, not from the autumn wind. You are just ordinary people. How can you understand great Supreme Master Chen's painstaking efforts? Chapter 515. Changhua had also consulted Chen Shi many times when he was in a good mood regarding cultivation. Chen Shi was a supreme martial artist, so his answers were unquestionable truth to Changhua. There were 8 methods of immortals: pills, talismans, weapon arrays, and witchcraft. Earth originally lacked the corresponding inheritance and materials, so there were very few rare and strange magic treasures. Even if there were 1 or 2, most of them were old antiques passed down from ancient times. The Supreme Palace enclosure was different from Earth. It had not experienced many changes, so compared to Earth, which lacked the inheritance of the 8 methods, the Supreme Palace enclosure was actually more like the United States, where weapons were not banned. Magic treasures were just consumer goods that could be seen everywhere. This was the reason why Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures. On one hand, it was because she entered the Dao through martial arts, and her body was her most powerful weapon. On the other hand, it was completely because she had never come into contact with magic treasures. Since she had never come into contact with them, how could she understand the benefits? If it was normal that Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures, then Chen Shi, who also did not like to use magic treasures, was obviously a little abnormal. Changhua had always thought that if the phoenix perch scorched tail box was still in his hands, Qin Xueqing could not possibly be his opponent. Therefore, after he was beaten up by Qin Xueqing, he had a discussion with Chen Shi about whether magic treasures were important or not. The result was naturally very obvious. From then on, Changhua was infected with the bad habit of not liking to use magic treasures. In fact, with Chen Shi's current cultivation, if he really wanted to obtain a magic treasure that suited him, it would not be difficult at all. He did not even need to spend much effort to find the materials. He only needed to take a stroll in the jade clear cave heaven with the title of Supreme Martial Artist Tianchu. There were so many treasures in there, so why couldn't he just casually pick one? As long as it was not some sect-guarding treasure, would the 4 perfected masters not even give this little face? So in the end, it was just that Chen Shi himself did not want it. Just like the words he always said. There is no other reason other than the sword in your heart. Magic treasures were indeed very useful. Some magic treasures were even more powerful than the cultivator's own strength. But even so, what could they do? No matter how strong the magic treasure in his hand was, this power was still just an external force. Personal strength was the foundation of an immortal cultivator. Blindly pursuing the grade of magic treasures and neglecting one's own strength. Wasn't such behavior already inferior? You don't understand? It's fine. Let me ask you the simplest question. Didn't you have a 9th grade spirit treasure previously? If the current you with your bare hands were to face the you who used to have a 9th grade spirit treasure, then do you think, which period would you be more powerful? With that, Chen Shi smiled mysteriously and patted Changhua's shoulder. This scene also left a deep impression on Changhua. Actually, this thing is just like dating. The one that suits you is the best. Though the phoenix perch scorched tail box is good, it does not suit you. Also, if you rely too much on external forces, other than being able to kill a few more people, it does not help your cultivation at all. So before you truly find a Dharma treasure that suits you, I suggest that you be yourself first. After Chen Shi's advice, Changhua finally understood. This sword, it was both in his hand and in his heart. When he did not have a sword in his hand, it was time for him to take out the sword in his heart. No magic treasures. After hearing Chenghua's words, the elder's eyes flashed with joy. One had to know that the competition schedule of the clan gathering was very tight. The competition was basically one after another. There was not enough time to rest and recuperate. If he went through a fierce battle right after he appeared, then even if he could successfully enter the final round, his performance would be greatly reduced. And if he could obtain victory at the lowest cost, and then face opponents of the same level in his peak state, his chances of winning would naturally increase by 30%. To the elder, the clan gathering was the only chance for him to make a comeback. Therefore, just as Chung Hua finished speaking, the elder pretended to be in a difficult position and replied, "Since young master is so confident, I can only accept your favor." "Young master, be careful. I am about to make my move. This move is called Wave Fanyan. Please enlighten me, young master." Even though the old man was calling himself a young master, the long saber in his hand danced with vigor and vigor. Although this move was called Wave Fanyan, it had nothing to do with water. As he waved the long saber in his hand, a streak of fire covered half of the arena, like a cloud in the evening. This brat! How can he be so careless? In midair, seeing the elder attack with all his might, Genryo was so angry that he trembled. Middle stage golden elixir against peak stage golden elixir. His opponent had clearly allowed him to make the first move, but Chung Hua insisted on being careless. Not only did he not use his Dharma treasure, he even allowed the elder to make the first move. What was this if not courting death? If not for the clan leader beside him, Genryo would have even appeared and reprimanded Chung Hua. Genryo was extremely anxious, but the clan leader was extremely calm. It was unknown whether he had confidence in Chung Hua or in Great Supreme Chen. In short, when the clan leader saw Genryo fidgeting, he immediately waved his hand and calmly comforted him. "Yuan Liang, don't be anxious. Let's watch first." The result was just as the clan leader expected. Just when everyone thought that Chung Hua would be defeated by the elder in one move, Chung Hua made his move. They saw, in the face of the raging flames that covered the sky, Chung Hua did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward. In an instant, like a bullet, he passed through the sea of flames and came to the elder's side at the fastest speed. Before the elder could even react, Chung Hua's fist brought along a strong gust of wind and smashed towards his head. A long punch from a distance and a short punch from close range. At that moment, not only did the elder not react, even the clan leader and the 8 elders who were watching from the side were stunned. Was this the move that Chung Hua learned from the Supreme Chin? But why did this move seem so strange? Bang! With a muffled sound, Chung Hua's fist made close contact with the elder's forehead. Chung Hua had been preparing for this punch for a long time. Previously, when he stood still, he seemed to be careless. In fact, he had been observing the elder's aura and flaws. Lang Fanyan? The name sounded nice, but the move was flashy and impractical. Although the flames in the sky looked scary, the real threat to Chung Hua was the long saber hidden in the flames. Therefore, Chung Hua only needed to find the path of the saber and successfully avoid it. Naturally, he could easily come to the elder's side. As a result, under everyone's dumbfounded expression, Chung Hua's fists were like a storm, crazily smashing on the old man's protective shield. Bang! 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 Chapter 516. Punching the Nanshan nursing home and kicking the Beihai kindergarten. Wasn't such an absurd and ridiculous scene happening right in front of everyone's eyes? Chung Hua had almost perfectly inherited Qin Xueqing's lifelong learning. Therefore, as soon as this move, which was very characteristic of Earth, appeared, it immediately caused a big sensation in the crowd. Since the day the 3 enclosures split apart, no one had ever seen such a shameless and strange move. Shouldn't the so-called immortal cultivators be like the immortals in the myths and legends, walking, sitting, and lying, showing the true colors of immortals? Immortals couldn't be like street gangsters, chasing each other with clubs and machetes, right? Therefore, when immortal cultivators fought with each other, most of them would only use magic treasures or spells to fight from a long distance. Here, ancient military formations could be used as an example. In a war, it wasn't just about which side had more people. If the cultivation of immortal cultivators was compared to the number of soldiers, Then the magic treasures and moves they used when fighting were the tactical strategies arranged by the commander of the military formation. On the battlefield, the situation was changing rapidly. There were always many factors that could affect the outcome of a battle. Even if one side had few soldiers and was far less powerful than the opponent, before the real fight, no one could guarantee that the weak side would lose. The family had hoped that Cheng Hua could bring him a certain surprise. But what he never expected was, Cheng Hua not only brought him a surprise, but also a certain degree of surprise. Even if Cheng Hua had used tricks such as straw boats to borrow arrows and fire to achieve a narrow victory, the family head wouldn't be surprised at all. After all, Cheng Hua was the disciple of the Supreme Being. However, Cheng Hua had used a completely unimaginable way to win the battle in a one-sided manner. My younger brother, Zhang Ida, took the head of a general among millions of soldiers as easily as taking something out of his pocket. He single-handedly attacked the enemy's den. This was Cheng Hua's tactic. There weren't so many flashy moves, and there weren't so many strange movements. There were only punches to the flesh, as well as repeated attacks that accurately hit the same position. And under this storm-like attack, soon, the old man's protective shield was broken. Boom. A strong gust of wind suddenly rose from the stage, and the old man's body was like a sandbag filled with cement, heavily smashing into the stage. From beginning to end, this unlucky Peak Jindan stage cultivator had never fought back even once. On one hand, it was because the rules of the competition forbade the use of defensive treasures. On the other hand, it was completely because he didn't react in time. Cough cough. Young master, you're so capable. This old man admits defeat. Looking at the expressionless Cheng Hua, the old man hesitated for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile. This was an arena competition. Methods such as self-detonating his golden core and burning his blood essence could not be used. Therefore, the moment the protective shield was broken, the old man had already lost the chance to make a comeback. Unless Cheng Hua was willing to give him time to adjust his breathing and wait until he was ready to fight again. Otherwise, if he continued to hold on, what awaited the old man was destined to be humiliation. Thank you for letting me win. Hearing the old man admit defeat, Cheng Hua cupped his fists and bowed to him, then slowly walked down the stage. When the audience below the stage saw Cheng Hua come down, they immediately divided into two lines and made a VIP passage for him. At that moment, the entire audience was silent. The crowd silently watched Cheng Hua. After his figure gradually disappeared into the distance, the crowd was like startled birds in the forest, and began to discuss excitedly. What's going on? He won just like that. A middle Jindan stage cultivator against a peak Jindan stage cultivator, and he won so easily? What kind of moves did they use, did you understand? Why do I feel like I didn't see anything? Looking at the audience below who were fiercely discussing the battle situation, Xianyuan Wuwang suddenly couldn't help but laugh. Haha. Yuanliang, your second son is really lucky. After saying that, without waiting for Genrio to reply, the family head had already left with an enigmatic smile on his face. Genrio looked at the stage below thoughtfully, but he suddenly had more expectations for this precious son of his. This was the move that the Supreme Being taught. It seemed simple, but it was very effective. Of course, with Genrio's cultivation, it was not difficult to see. Cheng Hua's victory in this competition was mainly due to the point of winning by surprise. Presumably, his next opponent would be prepared in advance after hearing that Cheng Hua had such a strange technique, so it was basically impossible for him to catch them off guard again. He didn't know what kind of surprise Cheng Hua would bring to him in the next competition. Thinking of this, even Genrio, who had always been serious, showed a faint smile at this moment. His son had done well, and as the father he also felt proud. Immortal cultivators did not need to rest. Therefore, from the moment it started, the gathering had to continue until the end. Following this, Cheng Hua went through another 2 rounds of competition. However, the opponents in these 2 matches were weaker than the old man from before. Therefore, Cheng Hua did not spend much effort, and easily defeated the 2 of them. By noon the next day, most of the weaker cultivators had been eliminated, and the competition officially entered the white-hot stage. Cheng Hua's fourth match was against a middle golden elixir stage cultivator. This middle golden elixir stage cultivator was incredible, because he was of the direct bloodline. He even called the current family head uncle. The Xianyuan family had many members, and this person was older than Cheng Hua by 20 years, so Cheng Hua did not recognize him. Of course, Cheng Hua could not be bothered to recognize him. Speaking of which, it was strange, unknowingly, that rash and willful Xianyuan Cheng Hua had now become much more low-key. Therefore, in the face of this direct bloodline cultivator's provocation, Cheng Hua did not even have much of an emotional fluctuation. He only treated the other party as a moving sandbag that could be easily crushed. As a result, Cheng Hua entered the final round just like that without any suspense. The family head was not very satisfied with this result, because Cheng Hua had not displayed any moves other than martial arts. Moreover, he was very curious about what Cheng Hua had learned from Great Supreme Qin. Therefore, in order to let Cheng Hua display his full strength, the family head decided to play some underhanded tricks. He ordered people to replace the opponent that Cheng Hua was supposed to encounter, and put the person who was recognized as the strongest in this meeting in front of Cheng Hua in advance. This person's name was Xianyuan Wuhan. He was of the direct bloodline, and his cultivation was at the peak of the golden elixir stage. However, although Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation was high, what was truly frightening about him was actually his age, because this year, he was already 233 years old. Chapter 517. Xianyuan Wuhan. Whenever this name was mentioned in the Xianyuan clan, everyone would have some impression of him, because he was already 230 years old this year. Furthermore, this was already the third time Xianyuan Wuhan had participated in the clan gathering. According to common sense, if he hadn't stepped into Yuanying when he was 200 or 300 years old, this kind of cultivation talent wasn't too bad. Yuanying wasn't that easy to condense. Many people spent their entire lives and might never be able to step over that threshold. However, Xianyuan Wuhan's situation was obviously a bit special. As a direct descendant of the Xianyuan clan, he had enjoyed unimaginable cultivation resources since he was young. Therefore, to a second-generation young master like Xianyuan Wuhan who was still stuck in the Aurus core stage when he was 200 or 300 years old, this was actually a rather humiliating thing. Could it be because Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation talent was too bad? However, the truth was exactly the opposite. In fact, Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation talent, even when placed in the entire Xianyuan clan, could be considered as one of the top few. This was a genius who had fallen. How high-spirited was the Xianyuan Wuhan of the past. When he participated in the clan gathering for the first time, his radiance was as dazzling as the afternoon sun, to the extent that bystanders couldn't even look straight at him. He was like the sun and moon in the sky. Anyone could only be overshadowed in front of him. Therefore, when Xianyuan Wuhan easily won the first place with his absolute tyrannical strength, everyone thought that he would be another rising star of the Xianyuan clan, even possibly becoming the next celestial lord of the Tuoba clan. However, no one would have thought that, in the following 100 years, Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation actually didn't have the slightest bit of progress. When he participated in the clan gathering for the first time, his cultivation was already at the peak of the Aurus core stage. 100 years had passed. At the start of the second clan gathering, everyone actually saw his figure on the stage again. The bystanders were shocked by Xianyuan Wuhan's stagnation, but the young talents who competed with him in the same period felt even more despair and helplessness. Why did this grandson come again? Even if Xianyuan Wuhan's performance in the second clan gathering was even more outstanding, everyone only felt that everything was to be expected. In any case, if they met him again, they would just directly admit defeat. Perhaps others could participate in the clan gathering for the second or third time. Only Xianyuan Wuhan could not. 100 years ago, Cheng Hua's elder brother, Zhenyuan Jingqi, was defeated by Xianyuan Wuhan. 100 years later, Zhenyuan Jingqi had already stepped into the Yuanying realm, but Xianyuan Wuhan was still stuck in the gold core realm. It was precisely because of this, Xianyuan Wuhan had completely fallen from the altar. Even if no one at the same level could defeat him, no one would submit to him from the bottom of their hearts. Xianyuan Wuhan remained unmoved by the suspicions and slander of the outside world. After every clan meeting, he would disappear from everyone's sight. No one knew what he had been doing for the past 100 years, but as long as the great clan gathering began, everyone would think of this name, Xianyuan Wuhan. Because everyone wanted to know, another 100 years had passed. Was Xianyuan Wuhan still at the peak of Jindan realm? As long as he remained in the Aurus core stage, he would always be the most talked about topic. The result was just as everyone expected. Xianyuan Wuhan came again. This was his third time participating in the great clan gathering. Along the way, many of the competitors who were unfortunate enough to meet him didn't even bother to step onto the stage, and directly stood below the stage to admit defeat. And this situation continued until Chenghua appeared. When Chenghua stepped onto the stage expressionlessly, including the manager who presided over this competition, almost everyone was shocked. On the stage, after Chenghua stood still, Xianyuan Wuhan, who usually didn't like to speak much, took the initiative to speak for the first time. I've seen your competition before. You have a lot of potential. Hearing this, Chenghua couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Thank you for your attention, Mr. Wuhan. Chenghua is very grateful." As the saying goes, the one who reaches the top comes first. Before an immortal cultivator was sure of the difference in seniority between them, they would usually address the other party as Mr. or Senior. Therefore, it wasn't a problem for Chenghua to address Xianyuan Wuhan as Mr. The moves you used in the previous few competitions were very strange. Every move you made seemed simple, but in fact, it contained some kind of truth. Perhaps Xianyuan Wuhan also knew why he would suddenly meet Chenghua, so he didn't immediately start fighting as he usually did. Instead, he took the initiative to chat with Chenghua. The scene didn't seem to be as hostile as people imagined. Chenghua was about to reply, but unexpectedly, Xianyuan Wuhan suddenly changed the topic. He suddenly used a lifeless tone and calmly said, "But the realm of this cultivation technique isn't high. Although it's very ingenious, it's only limited to this. If you only rely on this cultivation technique, you shouldn't be able to last more than 10 moves against me. So I suggest you either directly admit defeat, or take out some of your trump cards. Let me have a good feel of it. What's so special about the inheritance of the sovereign bloodline?" Xianyuan Wuhan didn't say the last sentence in front of everyone. Instead, he used the secret method of telepathy to send it directly to Chenghua's ears. Obviously, this brother was very clear about Chenghua's background. The reason why he was willing to talk nonsense with Chenghua was actually entirely because of Sovereign Chun. Chenghua was somewhat non-committal about this. It seemed like he was being looked down upon. It didn't matter. Let's see who's the real deal then. Therefore, Chenghua didn't say anything more. He directly cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. "I, Chenghua, would Mr. Wuhan please enlighten me?" Chenghua's reaction seemed to be somewhat out of Xianyuan Wuhan's expectations. Therefore, after hearing his declaration of war, a faint smile immediately appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. "Oh, come then." The battle suddenly started just like that. Chenghua's figure was like a ghost, and he instantly disappeared on the spot. Seeing that, Xianyuan Wuhan's reaction was completely different from the opponents that Chenghua had encountered before. He didn't take out his own magic weapon. Instead, he imitated Chenghua and went up to meet him with his bare hands. Both of their speeds were extremely fast. As soon as they came into contact, there was a series of bang bang bang, sounds of fists and feet colliding on the stage. In just a blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged a few blows. Although Chenghua had already mentally prepared himself to a certain extent before this. But at this moment, only then did he truly understand how terrifying Xianyuan Wuhan was. Even though Xianyuan Wuhan hadn't learned martial arts before, he was actually able to rely on his own rich cultivation and some shallow experience that he had accumulated from watching the battle before the competition to firmly suppress Chenghua. Chenghua's movements were very fast, but Xianyuan Wuhan was even faster than him. Chenghua's moves were very ingenious, but Xianyuan Wuhan was able to imitate him in the blink of an eye and return the favor in an instant. This was the true peak of Golden Elixir realm. In terms of cultivation, in terms of experience, in terms of skills, Changhua was still too young. And under the suppression of such absolute strength, he was like an unlucky person who had fallen into a quagmire. The harder he struggled, the faster he sank. When Xianyuan Wuhan gradually adapted to Chenghua's moves and gradually figured out some tricks from them, then Chenghua wouldn't be far from failure. Chapter 518. In the end, the martial arts that Chenghua learned was actually just a gold core stage cultivation method. In the future, as Qin Xueqing's cultivation continued to improve, this cultivation method might gradually become stronger and perfect. But before that, if Chenghua wanted to completely defeat Xianyuan Wuhan with this imperfect martial arts cultivation method, this was tantamount to a fool's dream. Xianyuan Wuhan was really too strong. The so-called invincible in the same realm was not just a saying. Xianyuan Wuhan did not even use any magic arts, nor did he use any magic treasures. He only needed to copy and learn Chenghua's moves through actual combat, and he could quickly master these moves, and then use the same moves to deal with Chenghua. The reason was not that Xianyuan Wuhan had a unique skill of giving someone a taste of their own medicine, but because the moves that Chenghua used were all on the surface, so Xianyuan Wuhan could quickly learn them for his own use. Immortal techniques were from the inside out, martial arts were from the outside in. The two seemed to be poles apart, but in fact they were different paths leading to the same goal. It was just like that old saying, the great Tao was like mercury flowing to the ground, and every grain was round. On the stage, Chenghua and Xianyuan Wuhan exchanged blows quickly. Below the stage, everyone cheered for Chenghua in unison. Since Xianyuan Wuhan was the great demon king in everyone's hearts, then Chenghua, who dared to fight with the great demon king, naturally became the hero in everyone's hearts. Although everyone knew that Chenghua would definitely fail, as long as he did not fall, the cheers below the stage would not stop for a moment. The two figures were like ghosts as they moved quickly on the stage. In just 10 minutes, the two had already exchanged no less than 200 moves. And as the two fought longer and longer, Chenghua also gradually showed signs of defeat. Just like a sports competition, when the skills and experience of the two sides were almost the same, physical strength became the most important deciding factor. Maintaining the protective shield consumed true essence, and every attack also consumed true essence. Chenghua was merely in the middle stage of the gold core realm. How could he fight with Xianyuan Wuhan, who was in the peak stage of the gold core realm for a long time? At that moment, any onlooker with a little bit of knowledge could see that Chenghua's defeat was inevitable. This child. He's already been forced to this point, but he's still not willing to show his true abilities. Yuan Liang, do you think he really only knows these moves, or does he have other plans in mind? The patriarch and the 8 elders were still watching the battle from the sky. After hearing the patriarch's question, Genrio fell silent. He did not respond. That was because he knew, regarding Chenghua's current performance, the patriarch was indeed somewhat disappointed. To be honest, if Chenghua wasn't a sovereign disciple, he wouldn't even have the qualifications to exchange blows with Xianyuan Wuhan. No matter how the outside world slandered and insulted Xianyuan Wuhan, in the patriarch's eyes, Xianyuan Wuhan would always be the person who had the most hope of breaking through to become a heavenly venerable after him. Outsiders didn't know the trick and only thought that Xianyuan Wuhan's potential had been squeezed dry. In reality, it was Xianyuan Wuhan himself who was unwilling to break through to become a Yuanying. In order to be able to repeatedly enter the great illusionary land, Xianyuan Wuhan had suppressed himself for 200 years. Even the patriarch couldn't help but be amazed by such boldness. There aren't that many geniuses in the world to begin with, and all those who have appeared out of nowhere are those who have accumulated in the past. Compared to Xianyuan Wuhan, Chenghua instantly became ordinary. As expected, after another 100 to 200 moves, Chenghua accidentally revealed an extremely small flaw because of his lack of strength. Xianyuan Wuhan keenly found this flaw, so he grabbed the opportunity and directly hit Chenghua's chest with a crushing punch. Bam! Accompanied by a muffled sound, a strong gust of wind blew on the stage. Chenghua's body was like a sandbag, and he was directly sent flying 20 meters away by Xianyuan Wuhan's attack. After Xianyuan Wuhan punched again, he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he suddenly stopped and silently waited for Cheng Hua to stand up from the ground again. Unlike the people below the stage who were sighing and lamenting, Cheng Hua appeared very relaxed. After Cheng Hua stood up from the ground, he politely cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. Then he said calmly, "Sir, you're very capable. I admit defeat." Although this punch didn't cause any substantial damage to Cheng Hua, he still admitted defeat very straightforwardly. After all, Xianyuan Wuhan didn't use any Dharma treasures or spells. He could actually easily defeat Cheng Hua with just a half-baked martial arts move that he learned on the spot. Even if he continued to fight, wouldn't he be humiliating himself? Anyway, Cheng Hua wasn't interested in the great illusionary land. Since he lost, then he would just admit defeat straightforwardly. Perhaps because he was used to being trampled by Qin Shiueqing. Cheng Hua didn't care about winning or losing at all. After admitting defeat, he turned around and prepared to leave. However, just as Cheng Hua admitted defeat and left, Xianyuan Wuhan's voice suddenly sounded behind him. "I heard that Mr. Chen once fought against the 4 immortals of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven by himself. So I originally thought that this master of the heavenly pivot must have some great ability to maneuver unhindered and invincible. Who would have thought that after seeing him today, I would know that the rumors were also untrue?" At this point, Xianyuan Wuhan suddenly couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. "Supreme Being? That's all." Xianyuan Wuhan's voice was very soft, but his tone was full of mockery. It was obvious that he was implying something with these words. So Cheng Hua immediately stopped in his tracks. He slowly turned around, and the expression on his face finally became serious. "I know. You said this just to provoke me to fight you with all my strength. But I still want to remind you. You can scold me, but you shouldn't have brought Mr. Chen into this." As he spoke, Cheng Hua stretched out his right hand. Then, without any movement from Cheng Hua, a long sword with a cold blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air. "Come on. Don't you all want to know what I learned from Mr. Chen? Then I'll show you today." What exactly did I learn? He didn't know when it started, but the figure who smiled all day to make his daughter happy had become an absolutely inviolable existence in Cheng Hua's mind. Xianyuan Wuhan could say that he wasn't good at learning, but he definitely couldn't say that Mr. Chen's reputation was undeserved. Including Genryo, the patriarch, the 8 elders and Xianyuan Wuhan, who was in front of him at this moment. Almost everyone was eager to know what peerless cultivation method Cheng Hua had learned from Chen Shi. Was the cultivation method used by a supreme being really that important? Thinking of this, Cheng Hua couldn't help but lower his head slightly to look at the long sword in his hand. In a trance, he saw the scene of Chen Shi holding the little fellow and standing in the courtyard with a smile on his face. Yes, Cheng Hua was very lucky. Others would lose their lives in vain if they went to the Tianshu ruins. Not only was he fine when he went to the Tianshu ruins, but he was also lucky enough to live with Supreme Chen for a period of time. But who would have thought that, during this period of time, what really benefited Cheng Hua was Mr. Chen's way of dealing with people. Chen Shi indeed didn't accept Cheng Hua as his disciple, and he had never even planned to do so. But in Cheng Hua's heart, Chen Shi was still half his master. It was just that he didn't dare to say it out loud. So Xianyuan Wuhan could scold him, but he couldn't scold Mr. Chen. Chapter 519. With the idea of clearing Mr. Chen's name, Cheng Hua brazenly drew his sword. The 3-foot-long sword in his hand drew a semicircle in the air, and the tip of the sword pointed directly in Xianyuan Wuhan's direction. The distance between the two of them was about 20 meters. The moment Cheng Hua pointed his long sword at Xianyuan Wuhan sensed a strong murderous aura surging toward him. But what made Xianyuan Wuhan slightly surprised was, although Cheng Hua's murderous aura was strong, the long sword in his hand did not show any signs of vital essence fluctuation. It was just like a lifeless wooden stick. Xianyuan Wuhan looked at Cheng Hua with slight confusion. But then he could not help but show a trace of seriousness on his face. No, something's wrong. Cheng Hua's murderous aura was so strong, but there was no sign of vital essence fluctuation around him. Under such circumstances, unless Cheng Hua was deliberately mystifying, this sword was definitely extraordinary. So, Xianyuan Wuhan immediately mobilized his vital essence and surrounded himself in it. At the same time, Cheng Hua had also finished accumulating power, and raised his hand to wave the long sword in his hand. "Mr. Wuhan, please enlighten me." Cheng Hua roared fiercely, and the long sword in his hand suddenly bloomed with a dazzling light. Before the sword was drawn, the sword chi became one, hidden but not released. The sword momentum was released. In an instant, like a long river hanging upside down, it soared into the sky and into the clouds. Wherever the sword light went, it could be said that heaven and earth lost their color, and the sun and moon turned away in shame. The ultimate sword was only for a moment of youth. Just as Cheng Hua waved this sword, the family head, who had been watching the battle in the air, suddenly changed his expression. This sword, why was it so similar to the rumors? As one of the three major families in Ningzhou, the Xianyuan family was naturally very concerned about the Tuoba family's change. There were rumors that the reason why Tuoba Yi was seriously injured and had to escape to death was because he was hit by Mr. Chen's sword. One had to know that Tuoba Yi was an Empyrean-level existence. But he couldn't even take one hit from Mr. Chen. Such a strange situation. Just thinking about it made one's hair stand on end. After all, the outside world didn't know what exactly happened at that time. So it was inevitable that everyone would speculate too much about this incident. As the person involved in the incident, Tuoba Yi had been recuperating in seclusion. As for Taoist Master Void Pierce Stage, due to his identity, it was impossible for him to personally appear and refute the rumors. This also caused the rumors to become more and more outrageous. Many people were even guessing whether Chun Shi had already touched the threshold of the semi-sage realm. Otherwise, how could he explain his magnificent feat of fighting against 4 opponents in the Jade Pure Cave Heaven? Since Mr. Chen was so powerful, as his direct disciple, Cheng Hua should have learned something, right? The patriarch had high hopes for Cheng Hua, so he sent Xianyuan Wuhan to test Cheng Hua. The result was just as the patriarch had hoped. Cheng Hua was successfully enraged by Xianyuan Wuhan. Thus he no longer held back, and his first move was a killing move. It was like pressing the shutter of a camera. As a strong light flashed, time suddenly stopped. Everyone felt their minds go blank. By the time they came back to their senses, Xianyuan Wuhan's tall and sturdy body that couldn't be considered to have landed directly flew backwards. Accompanied by a strong gust of wind, Xianyuan Wuhan fell heavily to the ground. Puff! There were no obvious wounds on Xianyuan Wuhan's body, but the violent impact still caused him some internal injuries, so he couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. Cheng Hua won? Looking at Xianyuan Wuhan, who fell heavily to the ground, everyone suddenly felt like they were dreaming. "Are you satisfied now? This is a sword move that Mr. Chen taught me. However, Cheng Hua's aptitude is too low, and he can't master the trick, so he can only barely make a pose." In fact, that sword move just now had exhausted all of Cheng Hua's vital essence, but in order to protect Mr. Chen's supreme reputation, Cheng Hua could only hold on to his last breath and pretended to be calm as he declared this victory declaration. After saying that, Cheng Hua turned around and left very confidently. Looking at his back as he left, a thoughtful expression suddenly appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. From the moment Cheng Hua waved the long sword in his hand, winning or losing this competition was no longer important. He not only proved himself, but also indirectly defended Mr. Chen's reputation. This sword move was indeed very powerful. But with the cultivation of the patriarch and the 8 elders, how could they not see that Cheng Hua was already an arrow at the end of its flight at that time? Although Xianyuan Wuhan suffered internal injuries, he still had the ability to get up and fight again. Therefore, if they continued to fight, Cheng Hua might not even be able to take one move from Xianyuan Wuhan. However, this was only an internal competition within the family after all. Since Cheng Hua waved this sword move, then no matter what the result was, the patriarch would definitely guarantee that he would be in the top 3. In fact, when Cheng Hua showed that sword move, even the patriarch, who was watching the battle, could not help but be a little tempted. If he were to use such a miraculous sword technique, what kind of power would it display? Thinking of this, The patriarch could not help but want Chenghua to hand over the sword technique. However, due to Mr. Chen's illustrious reputation, he could only suppress this greed in his heart and ask Chenghua indirectly. However, Chenghua was not stupid. No matter how the patriarch probed, his response was always only one word, which was sword one. It was neither the one sword concealing emptiness, nor the great Qianyuan. It was a set of sword techniques that Chen Shi created himself after hundreds of years of deliberation and deduction in the dark space after breaking through to the insightful emptiness realm. Because this set of sword techniques had been created not long ago and still needed to be perfected, Chen Shi passed the first move to Chenghua and Yi Ji, only hoping to find more loopholes from them. Their cultivation was not high, so it was easier to see the problem when they used it. There were always risks in doing experiments, right? They were lucky that there were no problems. Therefore, when Chen Shi passed on Sword 1 to them, he did not forget to repeatedly emphasize the risks involved. But the two of them were good. Not only were they not worried about whether they would be possessed by the devil, but they were diligently practicing every day, wishing that they could grasp this move in one go. In Chen Shi's eyes, the two of them were experimental white mice. But in the eyes of others, the appearance of Sword 1 confirmed their identity as the supreme martial artist's disciples. Therefore, it had to be said that this was really a beautiful misunderstanding. Throughout Chen Shi's life, the cultivation techniques he learned were all the top cultivation techniques in the world. First, there was the 49 styles of heaven evolution. Then there was the Xiantian evil emperor's saber and sword dual arts. And then there were the various treasured scriptures of the divine sect. As long as Chen Shi could think of a cultivation technique, it was basically included in it. Could it be that Chen Shi had nothing to do, so he wanted to create a set of cultivation techniques to play with? Of course, things were not that simple. Chen Shi seemed to be creating his own cultivation technique, but in fact he was refining what he had learned in his life. Just like the sentence he taught Chenghua. The most suitable for oneself was the best. Whether it was magic treasures or cultivation techniques, in fact, it was the same principle. At the insightful emptiness realm, the experience of predecessors could only be used as a reference. In the future, Chen Shi still needed to walk down the road by himself. Rough iron ore could no longer meet the needs of the insightful emptiness realm. So Chen Shi needed to smelt these iron ore until it was refined into steel. Then he could continue to use it. Chen Shi personally leaned towards sword techniques. Thus, he used the Moonlight Sword Technique and Dark Valley Sword Technique as the foundation to create a new cultivation technique that belonged to him. The name of this sword technique was very interesting. It was called Abundant Thought Sword Technique. The meaning was self-evident. Chen Shi was too lazy to name it, so he used the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the order. The first style was called Sword 1, and the second style was called Sword 2. If not for the fact that he wanted to raise the level and show off a little, he would not even bother to use the traditional 1, 2, and 3. After all, wouldn't Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3 be easier to write? Let's talk about it. Recently, many authors are using the main character's group writing method. I also want to try it, so there is this plot. Actually, the story is still the same story, but the way it is written is different. If it was from Chen Shi's point of view, then this story would be written in the future, and the development of the story would also be different. Maybe it's because my writing is not good enough, so the ending is not very good. So sad. But I will correct it. Humans always grow strong through stumbles. You just have to get used to it. Chapter 520. What was the true purpose of the Patriarch's clan meeting? Wasn't it to select the strongest gold core cultivator, so that they could obtain enough benefits for the family from the great illusionary land? Therefore, after Chenghua showed his strength, even if he didn't want to participate in any more competitions, the Patriarch would personally send him a spot to the great illusionary land. Of course, Chenghua wasn't very interested in the great illusionary land. After fighting with Xianyuan Wuhan, he only wanted to take advantage of the last few days of vacation, to spend more time with his mother. Then he would take the time to choose a few exquisite gifts for Nian Nian. After that, he could wait to return to Earth. Chenghua didn't know the importance of the great illusionary land, So he didn't know that the moment he took out Sword One, the patriarch had already made a decision. Next, even if he had to tie him up with a rope, he had to forcibly tie him up into the great illusionary land. After all, this was a major event that could affect the future development of the Xianyuan family. The patriarch knew that Changhua had a 7-day limit, but considering that Changhua was only going to the great illusionary land for a while, it wasn't like he wouldn't come back, so he wasn't very worried about Chen-Shi holding him responsible in the future. For the patriarch, this was really a very simple choice. Even if he made the worst choice, it would only delay Changhua for a while. Therefore, the patriarch would rather let Changhua break his promise to Chen-Shi than miss this once-in-a-century opportunity. Whether it was for Changhua or the Xianyuan family, the great illusionary land had great opportunities. Why would Xianyuan Wuhan rather forcibly seal his cultivation and waste 200 years than break through to the Yuanying realm? It was because the benefits that the great illusionary land could bring had far exceeded his expectations. There were too many people like Xianyuan Wuhan. Therefore, Chenghua's trip to the great illusionary land was imperative. Therefore, under the secret efforts of the various forces, the 3,000 candidates were quickly confirmed and reported to the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. When the 3 enclosures converged, it would be the start of the grand event. Now back to Chen-Shi. After he seriously discussed the issue of puppy love with the little fellow, Chen-Shi could finally put his hanging heart down for the time being. The cabbage at home hadn't even sprouted a bud yet, and the piglets outside already couldn't wait to eat it? Chen-Shi wanted to see. Who would dare? Humph. It had to be said that ever since Chen-Shi had taken precautions in his heart, he now felt that the other party was a thief, and the worst kind of vegetable thief. As a matter of fact, when Chen-Shi brought the little fellow to school the next day, an extremely serious expression hung on his face. His pair of eagle-like eyes were even more unbridled as they scanned the surroundings. With his current nervous appearance, those who didn't know better would probably think that he was transporting banknotes. By daddy, by mommy. Unlike Chen-Shi's vigilance, the little fellow behaved as usual, as if yesterday's love letter incident did not put too much of a psychological burden on her. Therefore, after she smiled and waved goodbye to her parents, she ran into the school gate like a wisp of smoke. As the class monitor, she naturally had to set an example. Therefore, she had to be the first to sit in the classroom before her classmates arrived. Nian had already woken up early enough, but there were still many children in the class who woke up earlier than her. It was not that these children were more diligent than her, but because most of these children lived far away, coupled with the fact that the morning rush hour in Shangjing was too congested, their parents had no choice but to send their children to school early every day and then rush to work. Living in Shangjing was really not easy. How could a rich second generation, like Nian, understand the hardships? As usual, when Nian arrived at the classroom, there were already a lot of people sitting sparsely in the classroom. Some children gathered together and chatted about games, while others chased and played at the back of the classroom. Not sure who shouted, "Class monitor is here." But a few mischievous children stopped what they were doing and returned to their seats. Looking at this situation, Nian, the class monitor, was almost synonymous with the teacher. Nian was very satisfied with the self-awareness of her classmates, so she went back to her seat. Because of yesterday's love letter incident, she did not immediately take out her textbook after putting down her bag. Instead, she bent down and looked at her drawer. Sure enough, there was another thing that did not belong to her. It was a piece of chocolate. Because Changhua and Yiji loved to eat chocolate, Nian also ate a lot with them, so she could be considered as knowledgeable. This type of chocolate was very common in the supermarket, called Ferrero. Usually there were 3 in a box, and a box cost 9 yuan. For adults, 9 yuan was naturally nothing, not to mention that there was only one here, and it did not even have a complete packaging. But for elementary school students who did not have much pocket money, Ferrero's status was far above spicy sticks and potato chips. After all, he only bought one for 3 yuan. You could only eat 1 bite each. From this, it could be seen that this anonymous confessor's feelings for Nian could be considered true love. The moment Nian saw the chocolate, she could not help but hesitate for a moment, then she took it out of the drawer. Regardless of who gave her this piece of chocolate, she would never eat it. because whether it was Chun Shi or Aunt Zhang, both of them had taught her not to eat things given by others. Therefore, Nian did not even bat an eyelid. She took the chocolate, turned around, and walked directly to the trash can at the back of the classroom. Children who were arranged to sit next to the trash can by the teacher were usually the most mischievous children in the class. Therefore, when this child saw Nian throw the chocolate into the trash can, his eyes immediately lit up. This is chocolate. Class monitor, you don't want it. Then I'll take it. This kid was very mischievous. He had already noticed that Nian was holding Ferrero's chocolate. The trash can had to be cleaned every afternoon, so the moment this golden chocolate fell into the trash can, this kid very quickly picked it up. It's delicious. This child's name was Lee Sanduo. His name was given casually, and so was his personality. He did not mind that the chocolate was picked up from the trash can at all. He tore open the packaging and ate it happily. Nian saw that he had picked up the chocolate and was about to return to her seat. At this moment, Lee Sanduo suddenly called out to her. Class monitor, if there's more good food in the future, don't throw it away, give it to me. I'll help you eat. Okay? Chapter 521. Speaking of which, Lee Sanduo was actually quite interesting. He wasn't tall, about half a head shorter than Nian, so he was one of the shortest in the class. Even so, this kid relied on his usual outstanding performance to get the teacher to arrange him in the last row, near the trash can at the back door. From this, it could be seen how mischievous this kid was in the teacher's eyes. Lee Sanduo was indeed very mischievous. However, his mischievousness was very different from other children. Perhaps it was because of his more antisocial personality. Lee Sanduo didn't have many friends in class, so when he had nothing to do, he would be alone in the last row, fiddling with something. Lee Sanduo never played around with his classmates, nor did he like to bully others, but he had a very bad habit that the teacher disliked. And that was that he liked to interrupt during class. Just like a comedian, no matter what the teacher said on stage, he would always be the first to respond, and then make the whole class burst into laughter. In any case, he was a third-grade student, but he always pretended to be stupid in class, deliberately disrupting the class discipline, so the teacher naturally disliked him. They weren't afraid of students being mischievous, but they were afraid of students being unreasonable. Obviously, Lee Sanduo belonged to the latter. It was unknown where this habit of his came from. After repeatedly failing to change, the teacher completely lost patience with him. One must know that this was the capital's affiliated primary school, and the teacher's shoulders carried a lot of pressure. The third grade was a very important turning point. Lee Sanduo didn't like to study, but he actually wanted to affect others' studies. How could the teacher tolerate this? Therefore, the teacher simply moved him to the last row, so that he wouldn't affect the other students. This was a warning. Lee Sanduo didn't necessarily understand, but his parents definitely understood. If he continued to mess around like this, it wouldn't be a matter of changing seats, but a matter of persuading him to transfer schools. A weirdo like Lee Sanduo wasn't very common. Although Nian didn't like him interrupting the teacher in class, that was another matter. Nian didn't hate him because of that. Therefore, after hearing Lee Sanduo's words, Nian turned to look at him, and then began to think seriously. Economy is a virtue. Wasn't there a famous quote hanging on the classroom wall? Anyway, it would be a waste to throw it away. If Lee Sanduo wanted to eat it, then let him have it. All right. All right. Thank you, class leader. Lee Sanduo seemed to know who put the chocolate in Nian's drawer, so when he saw Nian nod in agreement, his face showed a very happy smile. Oh yeah. Now he would have chocolate to eat every day. The result was just as Lee Sanduo had expected. For the next week, Nian would come to class every morning and find a piece of Ferrero chocolate in her drawer. Actually, she could have asked Big Cat to use its sense of smell to find this guy who had been secretly giving her gifts. However, considering that she didn't want to have any interaction with this person, Nian pretended that nothing had happened. After receiving the chocolate every day, she would give it to Lee Sanduo as soon as possible. 3 yuan worth of Ferrero chocolate. She gave it to him for a week. This was F** King true love. Under the nourishment of these love chocolates, Lisandra's complexion seemed to be a lot rosier than before. Even his thin and small figure showed signs of breaking out of the soil and growing at this moment. Lisandua was very grateful for Nianyan's generosity. Therefore, he now looked forward to tomorrow every day, hoping that he could eat such delicious chocolate tomorrow morning. But unfortunately, Lisandra's yearning for a happy life didn't last long before it completely came to an end. Early in the morning, after Nianyan came to class, she habitually looked down at her drawer as usual. Because she didn't see any chocolate, she couldn't help but be stunned. It couldn't be helped. Who asked her to develop a habit? Although she was a little surprised, Nianyan didn't take it to heart. It was better if no one disturbed her. Anyway, she would never fall in love with anyone early. Absolutely impossible. Without the chocolate, Nianyan naturally didn't need to deal with these things. Therefore, she subconsciously looked back, wanting to tell Lisandua that she didn't receive any chocolate today, so that Lisandua wouldn't have to wait there helplessly. However, after Nianyan turned back, she suddenly realized. Lisandua was like a frosted eggplant today, hugging his head and curling up in his seat. Looking from afar, he gave off a delicate and pitiful feeling. According to Lisandra's casual personality, even if he was scolded by the teacher, the expression on his face wouldn't change at all. Why did he seem like a different person today? Nianyan felt that it was a little strange. Out of concern for her classmate, after she put away her bag, she went straight to Lisandra's side. Lisandua, what's wrong with you? Hearing this, Lisandua buried his head on the table and didn't move at all. Nianyan couldn't help but worry, so she reached out and gently pushed him twice. Are you sick? Do you want me to help you apply for leave? Under Nianyan's constant questioning, Lisandua finally sat up from the table. However, he didn't immediately raise his head. Instead, it was as if someone had discovered a shameful secret. He impatiently waved his hand and said, I'm fine, don't bother me. What's wrong with you? Nianyan felt that his reaction was very strange, so she couldn't help but bend down so that her eyes were level with Lisandra's head. Then she saw the expression on his face. Lisandua seemed to be crying? Nianyan's eyesight was very good, so she immediately saw something strange on Lisandra's face. Lisandra's right cheek was a little red, and she could faintly see that it was a slap mark, plus the tear stains at the corner of his eyes. Looking at this situation, it seemed like he was bullied. This was bad. The little guy exploded on the spot. You're crying. Who bullied you? Tell me. I'll tell the teacher. Not to mention that she was now the class monitor. Even if she didn't have any position, Nianyan would never allow bullying in her class, because her father once said, we must firmly say no to bullying in school. Seeing that Lisandua was like a coward who only knew how to lie on the table and cry, Nianyan was suddenly a little angry. Thus she grabbed Lisandra's arm, pulled him up from his seat, and shouted angrily, Lisandua, stand up. Tell me who bullied you. I'll help you. Chapter 522. Although Nianyan didn't understand the specific meaning of the 8 words, eliminate evil and defend justice for the time being, this didn't stop her from having a warm-hearted heart that loved to fight for justice. Just like what her father usually taught her, regardless of status, background, knowledge, or upbringing, people need to respect each other. It was obvious that bullying others was a form of disrespect. Regardless of whether it was her or others who were bullied, Nianyan would never allow such things to happen around her. Therefore, after confirming that Lisandua was bullied, Nianyan immediately took out her position as the class monitor and fiercely wanted to fight for justice for Lisandua. Tell me who bullied you. Perhaps because she was angry, Nianyan's words were powerful and resonating. Her voice was very loud and instantly attracted the attention of the other students. In a moment, Lisandua, who was forcefully dragged out of his seat by Nianyan, became the focus of everyone's attention. According to Lisandra's personality, he definitely wouldn't care about how others looked at him. In fact, he might even be proud of himself. But Lisandua didn't know what was wrong with him today, but when he realized that the other students were looking at him, his face suddenly flushed red. Following that, he shouted at Nian Nian with an agitated face, "It's none of your business. Go away." As he said that, he struggled with all his might, as if he wanted to break free from Nian Nian's grip. Seeing Lee Sanduo's extreme reaction, Nian Nian could only resentfully withdraw her hand. Lee Sanduo. Nian Nian originally wanted to persuade him, but this Lee Sanduo seemed to have eaten gunpowder. Not only did he not accept Nian Nian's concern, he even straightened his neck and shouted at her, "Go away. It's none of your business. What does it have to do with you?" Annoying. Since he had already said that, Nian Nian naturally couldn't say anything more. She could only helplessly turn around and return to her seat. What did it mean to grieve for misfortune and be angry for failure to fight? That was it. Compared to high school, school bullying was actually more common in elementary and middle school. The so-called school bullying was actually bullying other students through beating, insulting, and mocking. There were two types of people who were the easiest to bully. One type was introverted and cowardly. Even if they were bullied, they would endure it out of fear, and thus be bullied for a long time. The other type was those who were flamboyant and liked to show off their uniqueness. Children with this type of character wouldn't care about other people's feelings, and would easily attract the attention of the bullies. Lee Sanduo obviously belonged to this type of bully. What was important to note here was that bullies were usually members of a small group. Therefore, once there was bullying, it was usually a group of people who committed the crime together. Lee Sanduo's personality seemed casual and undisciplined. He would make the teacher angry in class whenever he had nothing to do. In fact, it was clear that he was a rather proud and solitary person. It was difficult for people like him to make friends. Thus, he could only use all kinds of outrageous behavior to gain more attention and cover up the loneliness in his heart. It was also because of this that Lee Sanduo would rather suffer silently than show his weak side in front of others. He didn't need anyone's help, whether it was his parents, teachers, or classmates. The only one who could help him was himself. Thus, even if he was bullied today, Lee Sanduo didn't need any help, because he wouldn't easily bow down and admit defeat. Nian Nian couldn't figure out these complicated problems at the moment. Thus, her thoughts at the moment were very simple. That was, to help Lee Sanduo get rid of the bullies. To achieve this goal, Nian Nian purposely observed Lee Sanduo for a long time today. However, throughout the day, Lee Sanduo didn't show any signs of abnormality. During class, he would still interrupt the teacher's lecture. After class, he would quietly sit in his seat. During this period, he didn't interact with anyone. Thus, Nian Nian couldn't tell who was bullying him. Without catching the culprit, Nian Nian couldn't help even if she wanted to. Thus, she could only watch from the side. It wasn't easy to wait until school was over, but Lee Sanduo ran away with his school bag. This made Nian Nian, who wanted to know more about the case, feel a little depressed. She had no choice but to complain to her father. As usual, Chunxi arrived at the school gate on time. When Nian Nian came to his side, Chunxi picked her up from the ground. "Hey, what happened? Who made our little princess angry?" Since yesterday, when he learned that the little girl had begun to experience puppy love, Chunxi increased her security level. Thus, even if he was in the courtyard, he could check on the little girl's situation through the big cat. Thus, even without Nian Nian saying anything, Chunxi already knew what she had experienced today. The little girl couldn't figure out Lee Sanduo's behavior, so she immediately told Chunxi the whole story. Seeing that the little girl was so warm-hearted, Chunxi naturally had to encourage her. Thus, after thinking for a while, he directly pointed out the key point. "Nian Nian, since Lee Sanduo was already crying on the table when you saw him, that means he must have been bullied before you came to school. So if you want to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, you just have to wake up earlier in the future and be the first to go to class." Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. What Daddy said made sense. No wonder she couldn't find the culprit. No matter how hard she tried, they committed the crime in the morning. Then I have to wake up earlier tomorrow. Daddy, remember to call me. I want to protect Lee Sanduo. I can't let him be bullied by others. Seeing the little girl's indignant look, Chunxi couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. To Chunxi, the importance of this matter might not be as important as the supermarket discount. But to the little girl, This was an important matter that was enough to establish her values. Thus, not only did Chen-Shi not interfere, but he also followed the little girl's request and waited until dawn the next day to pull her out of bed. "Wake up, my little hero. There are still people waiting for you to save them." The little girl was still a little dazed at first. After hearing Chen-Shi's words, she immediately turned over and jumped out of bed as if she had been injected with chicken blood. "Daddy, let's go." How could the great Supreme Chen's daughter be the kind of person with bad values? Born between heaven and earth, she naturally had to be a chivalrous person and uphold justice. Chapter 523. With a firm resolve to uphold justice, the little fellow woke up early in the morning, which was a rare occurrence. When the father and daughter took a taxi to school, they arrived almost an hour earlier than usual. The capital-affiliated elementary school did not have a boarding school. Even though it was still early in the morning, the school gate was already bustling with activity. As a parent, Chen-Shi naturally could not instigate Nian to fight. Regardless of whether he could win or not, fighting was definitely wrong. Thus, when he saw the little girl's excited face, Chen-Shi smiled and reminded her. However, it was just a reminder. From the beginning to the end, Chen-Shi had no intention of interfering in this matter. As long as Nian's starting point was correct, no matter what she wanted to do as a father, he would support her with both hands and feet. School bullying, in fact, was just school violence. Many children were weak and did not dare to tell their teachers and parents even if they were bullied. Thus, once bullying occurred, it would usually last for a long time. Those who had not experienced such an incident would find it difficult to understand the despair and helplessness of the victims. Fear, helplessness, and panic. It was like a nightmare that pressured them to the point of suffocation. But the teachers and parents did not notice at all. They did not even dare to look at the bully. As long as the bully appeared in front of them, they would lower their heads and become silent dogs that only knew how to wag their tails and beg for mercy. This kind of thing was unavoidable. It was like a steel wire that was tied up and gradually tightened around the victim's heart. They were in pain, but they could not make a sound. Lu Sun once said, "If you do not explode in silence, you will perish in silence." There was a limit to everything. If Nian was willing to stand up and stop it, Chen-Shi would not let her stand aside and be a bystander. "Dad, don't worry. I won't fight with them. I just want to stop them from bullying Lee Sanduo." Adhering to the responsibility and awareness of being the class leader, the little girl waved goodbye to Chen-Shi in high spirits, and then ran with big strides towards the teaching building. In the future, she would be the first to reach the classroom. Nian's classroom was on the 3rd floor. When she rushed to the classroom, there were already 2 or 3 students sitting in the classroom. She glanced at the back of the classroom and saw that Lee Sanduo was not there yet. Thus, she returned to her seat and habitually looked at her drawer. Fortunately, there was no chocolate. It was still early, and even the teacher hadn't arrived at school yet, so after waiting for a while, Nian temporarily put these distracting thoughts behind her. She took out the textbook and began to review it seriously. In fact, she was not sure if Lee Sanduo would be bullied today. Chapter 524. The teaching building of the capital-affiliated primary school was an outer corridor. Nian was blocking the front door, so she blocked the only way out for this group of people. Although she was only a little more than 1.2 meters tall, when she bravely stood in front of the crowd, her small figure suddenly seemed infinitely taller. "Don't leave. You have to apologize to Lee Sanduo. Or I'll tell the teacher. Tell him you bullied him." Nian took out her trump card. For the lower grade students, the class leader's report was naturally quite lethal. However, to these senior school tyrants in front of them, how could such a weak threat be able to scare them? To put it bluntly, even if the teacher came today, they would at most be frightened for a while, then they would quickly calm down. Anyway, the teacher couldn't punish them physically. In the end, the only method that could be used was to call the parents. But if calling the parents was useful, how could they develop such a bad habit of doing things unscrupulously, and without respect for others. Therefore, this was a paradox in itself. The fundamental reason why school bullying did not stop, and even had a tendency to become more and more intense, was the fundamental reason why school bullying did not stop. After all, the teachers did not have clairvoyant eyes and ears, so before they had absolutely strong evidence, the teachers could only use verbal warnings to prevent bullying from happening again. But it was a pity. Some people were born bad. With Wuxia's current education system, unless the situation was out of control, the teachers would never easily expel or dissuade a student. And this also meant that once the victim chose to endure, the bullying would continue until he graduated or transferred schools. Years of bullying and oppression. To a child whose mind was not yet fully developed, what kind of cruel torture would that be? There was no junior high school in the capital, so the 6th grade students were the most powerful existence in the school. Therefore, when facing a 3rd grade girl like Nian, the leading child did not take her threat seriously. Children at this age already knew the difference between boys and girls, so he did not deliberately make things difficult for Nian. Instead, he said impatiently, "Go away." The group of people did not stop walking. Soon, they arrived in front of Nian. Nian tried to reach out and stop him, but he pushed her aside with his long arms and legs. Things were getting out of hand. Before Nian could react, the big cat, who had been observing the situation from the tree, was the first to explode. Meow. As if someone had stepped on its tail, the big cat let out a fierce howl and crouched on the tree trunk, ready to pounce. But just as it was about to pounce, the big cat seemed to have received some sort of command, and its body suddenly froze in place. Both of its ears trembled slightly, and its tense body immediately relaxed. Then it returned to its soft and feeble state. Meow. The big cat obediently laid back down, as if nothing had happened. The children had no idea that they had just walked through the gates of hell. Because of the seal in her body, even though Nian had already started cultivating, the strength of her body did not change much. Therefore, after being pushed hard by the leader of the children, Nian immediately staggered and leaned against the railing of the corridor. From the beginning to the end, the leader of the children did not take her seriously. But he did not expect, after being pushed away, Nian immediately went forward and grabbed his arm, then shouted angrily, "You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave." This completely angered the other party. After all, he was a 6th grade student. Facing Nian, who had skipped a grade to become a 3rd grade, he naturally had an absolute advantage in terms of physical strength. So he immediately grabbed Nian's wrist and used all his strength to twist her fingers. "Let go. Believe it or not, I'll beat you up. Get out of my way." An absurd farce was suddenly staged. Nian held on tightly to the person's arm, and the leader of the children struggled with all his might. After a few seconds of entanglement, the other party suddenly lost his patience. So he no longer cared about gender differences, and raised his leg to kick Nian. Seeing this, the big cat could only helplessly close its eyes. It had no choice. She did not allow it to interfere. Bang. The big cat did not stop him, and Nian's calf suffered a heavy kick. This was great. Nian was completely angered by the other party's actions. "Do you still remember what Daddy said? We don't bully others, but we definitely can't let others bully us." So she immediately copied the other party, raised her right leg, and without a word kicked over. Moreover, her kick was even more ruthless and decisive than the other party's. After being kicked by her, the expression on the leader's face was very interesting. "You still dare to fight back? Brothers, beat her up for me." The other children had some reservations, but after seeing that Nian dared to fight back, they swarmed over. They wanted to gang up on Nian, just like when they ganged up on others in the past. Meow. The big cat could not bear to watch any longer. But just as it stood up again, and was about to jump over to interfere, a thin figure suddenly rushed out from the front door. Crack. A crisp sound was heard, and everyone, including Nian, could not help but turn to look. It was Lee Sanduo. After seeing that Nian was being ganged up on, this kid suddenly had the courage to pick up a plastic broom and hit the back of one of the children who was standing there. After the child who was beaten felt the pain, he immediately let out a blood-curdling scream. Then, as if he had gone crazy, he turned around and rushed towards Lee Sanduo. Then he violently pressed Lee Sanduo against the wall and started beating him up with all his might. After all, Nian Nian was a girl, so when facing her, these children might not be able to do it. But if they wanted to hit Lee Sanduo, these children would be more ruthless than the other. So, they immediately turned their muzzles and rushed towards Lee Sanduo. Seeing this, Lee Sanduo changed his usual cowardly image. Not only did he withstand the punches and kicks of everyone, but he also fought back with all his might. A huge battle suddenly broke out just like that. After hearing the sounds of fighting in the corridor, the children who were originally sitting in the classroom rushed out one after another. There's a fight! There's a fight! Look, there's a fight over there! Go and tell the teacher. Chapter 525. Kids always like to join in the fun. Therefore, as soon as the fight started in the music room, the entire teaching building was in an uproar. Students from every class swarmed into the hallway to watch the fight. Some busybodies even put on a look of wanting to see the world in chaos, and actually clapped and cheered excitedly. There was still about half an hour before the morning reading time, so most of the teachers were already in the office, eating breakfast and chatting. Look, there are kids fighting outside. One of the teachers heard the commotion outside, and immediately went to the window to take a look. What he saw was a big deal. The teacher was so scared that he threw away the soy milk and bread in his hand, and then rushed out of the office in a hurry. One must know that this was a primary school in the capital. Once a fight broke out, not only would the school punish the child involved, but they would also hold the teacher responsible for the child's class. Including Nian Nian, there were not only 2 kids pushing and pulling each other in the hallway, but as many as 7 or 8. Therefore, the nature of this matter had escalated to the level of a gang fight, which was why it caused such a big commotion. They were in a gang fight. Everyone stop. What are you doing? The first to arrive at the scene was a P.E. teacher. Primary school P.E. teachers were very different from middle school P.E. teachers. Because he often taught the children broadcast gymnastics, the teacher recognized the leading child at a glance. Li Hu, stop it. Li Hu and his brothers were squeezing Lee Sanduo into a corner, so they did not notice the P.E. teacher's appearance at all. At this time Nian Nian, who had been standing at the back, saw the teacher's arrival. One had to admit that this little thing was quite clever. After seeing the P.E. teacher appear, she immediately took a few steps back, then pointed at the group of people in front of her and said righteously, "Teacher, they're bullying Lee Sanduo. I'm helping him." Until now, the children still did not notice the P.E. teacher's appearance. All of you stop. Seeing this, the P.E. teacher could not help but be a little angry. After a violent shout, he directly reached out and grabbed one of the children's ears, then pulled the child out of the crowd. "Stand still. Don't move. If you dare to move again, I'll slap you." The physical education teacher also had a bad temper. He was not polite to these naughty kids at all. Under his tugging and kicking interference, Li Hu and the others immediately retreated to the side like mice seeing a cat, hanging their heads and not daring to move. Lee Sanduo was thin and small to begin with. In addition, Li Hu and the others were mostly 6th graders, so the PE teacher could tell who was the victim at a glance. "Which class are you from? Are you okay?" As he spoke, the teacher pulled Lee Sanduo to his side and helped him pat off the footprints on his body. Even though primary school students were a little reckless when fighting, they weren't very strong, so Lee Sanduo didn't have any serious external injuries. But even so, Lee Sanduo's face was suffused with a strange layer of redness. She reckoned that it wouldn't be long before this child turned into a swollen pig head with bruises all over his face. With the timely intervention of the PE teacher, this farce finally came to an end. Then all the participants of the fight, including Nian Nian, were brought to the principal's office by the teacher. "Tell me, why did you fight?" The nature of today's incident was too bad, so it could only be handled by the principal himself. At this time, Li Hu and the others finally realized what they had done today. Therefore, after hearing the principal's question, The few children were like frosted eggplants, not daring to even breathe loudly. "Teacher, let me tell you." The little girl came to the principal's office as a witness of this incident. She was a girl, plus she was young and her usual performance was very good. So when the PE teacher saw Nian, he thought of her as a good student, a good class monitor who came to stop the fight. This was the natural advantage of being a top student. No matter how Li Hu defended himself, the principal would not listen to his explanation. Instead, he thought that this naughty kid was hopeless. Therefore, Nian, with the principal's intention to side with her, confidently told the whole story. Of course, she was telling the story from her own perspective. From her point of view, Li Sanduo was an innocent victim. After being targeted by Li Hu and the others for no reason, Li Sanduo could only silently endure Li Hu and the others' bullying. Therefore, no matter how the principal pursued the matter, in the end, it should not be Li Sanduo's fault. Li Sanduo was innocent. After hearing Nian forcefully defend Li Sanduo, Li Hu and the others were a little unhappy. They saw Li Hu used his body to lightly bump the child beside him. Then, the child seemed to have been provoked by something and could not help but explain with a red face. "It's not like that. Li Sanduo stole my chocolate. I asked him to return it to me. He didn't give it to me. That's why we hit him." In the end, the child seemed to have realized that hitting people was wrong, so his voice suddenly became low. Seeing this, the principal did not immediately speak. Instead, he looked thoughtfully at Nian. The principal originally wanted to use the confrontation between the two sides to clarify the entire matter, so that he could give an absolutely fair punishment. Who would have thought, after being glanced at by the principal, Nian said very honestly, "I gave the chocolate to Li Sanduo." After saying this, Nian was still a little afraid that the principal would not believe her, so she told him about the love letter and chocolate that she received previously. Now this was great. After hearing Nian's story, the child's little face flushed red all the way to his ears. He was so embarrassed that he did not even dare to raise his head. "What's your name?" The principal was not asking Nian, but the unlucky one who had a crush on her. My name is Zhu Xingyu. Which class are you from?" "Third year, class 1. At that moment, the principal suddenly understood the entire situation. Thus, after waving his hand to let Nian and Li Sanduo leave first, the principal turned his head to look at Zhu Xingyu calmly and said, "Zhu Xingyu, right? Come here for a moment. There's a phone here. Do you know your parents' phone number? Come give them a call." After hearing the principal's words, the child named Zhu Xingyu immediately burst into tears. It was obvious that this child knew what it meant to call his parents. However, all of this had nothing to do with Nian anymore. Li Sanduo and Nian walked out of the principal's office side by side. At this time, class had already started, so the entire school returned to its usual tranquility. The two of them were silent. Li Sanduo suddenly thought of something. Then he said to Nian with a serious face, "Thank you." This time, Li Sanduo did not call Nian class monitor in a sarcastic manner. Instead, he called her name seriously. Chinyan. Chapter 526. After writing, deleting, and writing, he was still not satisfied. He really couldn't afford to do it now. Sleep, I'll fight again tomorrow. I can't finish writing returning from cultivation to become a stay-at-home dad. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 527. In the face of school bullying, silence was not a good solution. Silence was a disguised form of retreat. So instead of hoping that the bad guys would be kind and show mercy, it was better to tell them with the most firm attitude. We're not that easy to bully. Maybe I can't beat you, but I'm definitely not afraid of you. If you kick me, I'll return the favor with a punch. As long as I don't fall, I'll never bow down to evil. Li Sanduo really experienced this feeling today. Although he had been beaten up so badly that he was limping a little, he was still able to walk. But at least at this moment, Li Sanduo was still in a very good mood. It had to be said, It felt good to use his fists to win respect for himself. Recalling the bravery he displayed at the critical moment, Lee Sanduo suddenly felt as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He walked with vigor and vigor. Class monitor, don't worry. If they dare to cause trouble in the future, I'll never be afraid of them again. So what if they have more people? I'll punch them until they cry. Like all boys, Lee Sanduo's performance before and after the incident was like a different person. He kept bragging about his brave performance just now, but after Nian heard it, she kept her head down and didn't say a word. It was not good to show off without support. So Lee Sanduo couldn't help but poke Nian, then asked with a puzzled face, "Class monitor, what's wrong with you?" Nian glanced at him, but still ignored him. Instead, she frowned slightly and muttered to herself, No, Auntie didn't teach me that. When Li Hu kicked me, I should have used my knee to block his foot, then raised my elbow to hit his chin. That way, he would have instantly lost his ability to fight." As he spoke, the little guy even began to mimic the movements of his hands. Qin Xueqing taught her some basic martial arts moves, but she was still young, so she couldn't understand the subtleties. Therefore, after everything had been settled, she finally remembered the moves that Qin Xueqing had taught her. Nian gestured as if there was no one around. After seeing this scene, Lee Sanduo's expression was very interesting. That's right. Wasn't the main culprit who started this war the class leader who always acted like a good student in front of him? If it wasn't for the class monitor, would Lee Sanduo be able to walk out of the principal's office unscathed today? Thinking of this, Lee Sanduo didn't dare to say another word. As the two of them returned to the classroom under the watchful eyes of the entire class, the farce finally came to an end. After Li Hu and his group were severely warned by the principal, they were completely dispirited. After that, not only did Lee Sanduo never see them again, but even Nian's drawer didn't have chocolate anymore. Now that he thought about it, Nian seemed to have suffered a loss. Life returned to its usual tranquility. The weather in Shangjing gradually became hot. The tea house welcomed the peak season again, but unfortunately, its owner was no longer in the mood to run it. Because of this, Gu Lao had to make a special trip to the Sai courtyard to drink tea with Chun Shi under the old locust tree. The two played chess and chatted. Their days were particularly comfortable. The life of a retired veteran was probably like this. Early in the morning, Chun Shi sent Nian to school. Not long after returning to the courtyard, there was a rush of knocking outside the courtyard. He thought that Gu Lao was here to drink tea again, so he opened the door with a smile on his face. But what Chun Shi didn't expect was, when he opened the door, it wasn't Gu Lao who appeared in front of him, but a man and a woman. Chun Shi knew these two people. The man was called Xiao Wang, and the woman was called Xiao Lu. The two belonged to the Wu Lian inspection office, and were responsible for monitoring him. The year before last, at the request of Qin Yongwang, they delivered a car to his family. What's the matter? Chun Shi wasn't a voyeur, so under normal circumstances, he didn't release his divine sense to pay attention to the situation around him. After all, he lived in the capital of the country, and in the most central part of the city. Naturally, he didn't have to worry too much about safety. Anyway, as long as no one broke into the courtyard, Chun Shi didn't care. Mr. Chun, it's like this. Seeing that Chun Shi's attitude was still mild, the young man called Xiao Wang hesitated for a moment before he said, "We just received an emergency report that someone may cause trouble on Chang'an Street tomorrow. Hohai is not far from Chang'an Street. The leader is worried that if there is an accident, it may affect you. So he asked us to inform you in advance so that you can prepare in advance." After hearing what Xiao Wang said, Chun Shi was instantly amused. Wang Chuanju's arrangement was a bit interesting. What was Chang'an Street? The first street of Wuxia. Not only was there the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square on this street, but there was also Zongnanhai and the Great Hall of the People. Who would dare to cause trouble in such a place? They must have eaten too much, right? Chun Shi subconsciously felt that this matter was a bit ridiculous. After he pondered for a moment, he suddenly realized the deeper meaning of it. It turned out that Wang Chuanju was giving him a heads-up. Since Wu Lian had already sent someone to inform him, it meant that this matter wasn't groundless. Something big was going to happen tomorrow. After all, Things were not the same as before. Now that the internet was so advanced, once something happened on Chang'an Street, it would spread throughout the country, and even the world in an instant. How embarrassing would that be? It would be embarrassing for the whole country. It was said that the security at the entrance of the Forbidden City was very strong, but had there been any lack of incidents on Chang'an Street over the years? For example, the Jinshui Bridge incident, the Founding Gate incident, the self-immolation incident. It would be embarrassing to pick out any one of them. Why did Wang Chuanju specifically send someone to inform him? It was to prevent the situation from getting out of control, so she wanted Chen Shi to act as insurance. What was prevention? That was to nip all the criminals in the bud before they started their illegal activities. Could it be that they had to wait for the other party to blow up Chang'an Street and directly commit a crime before they could arrest them? What a joke! Nothing must happen on Chang'an Street. Therefore, Wu Lian had to catch them all in one fell swoop before they took action. Although Chen Shi made it clear that he wouldn't help Wu Lian do anything, this happened in front of his house. Could he just sit by and do nothing? If the troublemakers were forced to do something desperate by Wu Lian and did something shocking, they would naturally need Chen Shi's help to resolve all of this in time to avoid causing panic among the people. There was nothing wrong with Wang Chuanju's arrangement. However, what made Chen Shi feel slightly strange was, who exactly was the troublemakers tomorrow? Who would make Wu Lian put on such a big show and even need him to act as the last safety guarantee? Chapter 528. Chen Shi was very curious about what would happen tomorrow, so he asked Xiaowang in detail. But no matter how he probed, Xiaowang refused to reveal any details. He didn't know if he really didn't have enough authority, or Wang Chuanju deliberately told him not to say anything. In short, no matter what the truth was, Chen Shi's curiosity was successfully aroused by Xiaowang. It was said that within 10 years, Wuxia would have a total of 96 new types of frigates, including aircraft carriers, and officially enter the naval establishment. Under such circumstances, there were still people who dared to make trouble on Chang'an Street. It had to be said that they were really courageous. As an outstanding young man of the new era who grew up singing, "I love Beijing's Tiananmen Square, the sun rises on Tiananmen Square." As long as Chen Shi thought about what might happen tomorrow on Chang'an Street, he really wanted to immediately move a small stool to the front row to occupy a good seat. This was a very pure family plot, and it had nothing to do with personal experience. As long as one was not born rebellious, one would have a special feeling for the homeland that raised them. Homeland, homeland, homeland. That was the meaning. Of course, with Chen Shi's current cultivation, he could basically be regarded as a god who lived on Earth. Gods would not intervene in the affairs of the mortal world, but they would always pay attention to every move in the mortal world. And this kind of behavior that clearly had the ability to intervene, but chose to stay out of it to watch the fun, was often said to be eating melons. Just like the little girl who watched the trailer of a certain animated movie. After watching the trailer, she would naturally wait in front of the TV on time, only hoping that the movie was more exciting than the trailer. Chen Shi was such a qualified melon eater now. Therefore, early the next morning, after Chen Shi sent Nian to school again, he directly released his divine sense. From Jiangguimen to Fuxing Gate in the west. With Tiananmen Square as the center, any movement within a radius of 10 kilometers was under his control. Xiaowang did not lie to him. On this day, the Forbidden City was still open to the public, but the security forces on Tiananmen Square were obviously more than usual. It could be said that there was a sentry every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. In addition to these guards on the surface, there were also many plainclothes people disguised as tourists wandering around the square. On the surface, everything was as usual, but secretly, they were jittery and paranoid. It's a bit interesting, even snipers are here? Chen Shi returned to the courtyard, but his attention was always on Chang'an Street. In addition to a few snipers hidden on the viewing platform, there were 3 buses with travel agencies' signboards parked not far from the flag stand. There were nearly 100 people in the 3 cars. All of them were warriors, and most of them were at the level of transforming strength. In addition to these conventional arrangements, Chunxi also found that there was a celestial overseeing each of the 4 cardinal directions of the square. From this, it could be seen how much importance the Wu Lian attached to this impending big event. Because they did not know when the other party would take action. The guards on the square had to be in a state of high tension at all times, so that they could control the troublemakers as soon as the incident happened and prevent the situation from escalating. In fact, since Qin Shiweqing and the 300 deities of Daiyu Island were not present, it meant that the troublemakers could not pose a threat, so there was no need for the deities to suppress them. This was a contest between mortals. The reason why Wang Chuanju sent someone to inform Qin was mainly because Chunxi lived nearby. Once the situation changed and went out of the Wu Alliance's control, Chunxi would have to step in and resolve everything in time to prevent the innocent people from being alarmed. It had to be said that Wang Chuanju was very thoughtful. She did not even ask Chunxi for help, but she indirectly made Chunxi pay attention to this matter. As long as Chunxi paid attention to this matter, then everything else would be easy to deal with. It was not that Wang Chuanju was so shrewd that she even wanted to scheme against Chunxi, but because this matter was too important. After all, Tiananmen Square was the face of Wuxia, so no accidents could happen. Once the operation began, the Wu Lian would catch all these criminals in one fell swoop. Wang Chuanju's arrangement was very reliable, but what she did not expect was, after the Wu Lian had made all the preparations, there was still no sign of the troublemakers showing up. Chunxi sat on the rocking chair and waited from morning to afternoon. When the sun was about to set, the streets of Chang were still as peaceful as ever. The warm sunlight sprinkled on one's body, and a long wait inevitably made one feel sleepy. Boss, didn't the higher-ups say that something would happen today? How come we haven't even seen a single shadow after waiting for so long? Wait slowly. Are you still hoping for something to happen? Let me tell you, it's best if nothing happens. If something does, you'll cry. In a police car next to the square, 2 men in police uniforms were holding binoculars and chatting idly. Their task today was very simple, which was to maintain order at the scene to avoid causing panic among the crowd. As basic police officers, the 2 of them did not know what would happen today, but this did not prevent them from speculating. Something big was going to happen today. Therefore, the 2 of them were like Chunxi now, and even somewhat hoped that the troublemakers would show up soon. What time is it now? While the operation team and intelligence group repeatedly confirmed the target's information, the elderly tour group slowly walked out of the passage under the guidance of the tour guide and came directly under the president's statue. Soon after, a shocking scene occurred. After these old men walked out of the city gate tower's passageway, they neatly lined up in a 6x6 square formation, as if they had rehearsed it beforehand. Then they all sat cross-legged on the ground. From the beginning to the end, these elderly people did not make a single sound. Wait, something happened. They're staging a sit-in. Unlike ordinary protesters, this Super Pengsi group was small in number, and their behavior was very strange. The tour guide was the only middle-aged man. After seeing his tour group doing such a shocking thing, he did not stand up to stop them. Instead, he directly walked past the crowd and stood in the first row of the group. The tour guide stood while the elderly people sat. When the passing tourists saw this scene, they could not help but stop and stand nearby and whisper to each other. What's going on? What's going on? Is something big going to happen? Where's the phone? Take a picture. As more and more people gathered in the square, after taking a deep breath, the tour guide faced the elderly people and slowly sat on the ground. Then the middle-aged man dressed as a tour guide recited in front of everyone in the room, with a cadence of intonation. This is the beginning of the end. Xian cultivator, the ancestor of nature, and the great sect of thousands of people. It's profound, so it's called subtle. It's continuous, so it's called wonderful. It's high, so it covers the 9 heavens, so it's wide, so it covers the 8 corners. It's as bright as the sun and the moon, so fast as lightning. It's as bright as a flash, or drifting like a stream of stars, or rippling like a deep pool. or flying like a cloud. This passage came from a Taoist classic. Naturally, ordinary people would not understand what he was saying. But for the members of the operation group, this passage was no less shocking than a sudden clap of thunder. It was inexplicably shocking. This is a cultivation technique? He's preaching? Quick, stop him. Hearing the manager's angry roar from the headset, the staff suddenly came back to their senses. Then they no longer cared about shocking the world. In front of all the tourists present, they directly pounced on the elderly tour group fiercely. However, just as one of the operation members was about to get close to the elderly people, an invisible force suddenly sent him flying, and he fell heavily on the wall of the tower. Bang! With a muffled sound, the operation member, who was only at the mid-stage of concealing strength, fainted on the spot. At this time, the manager of the operation group suddenly realized that these elderly people, who seemed to be on the verge of death, had secretly set up a defensive array under the tower according to the arrangement of the 36 Big Dipper gods. Fu Xian Dao, obtain from the inside, guard from the outside, use from the spirit, forget from the weapon. This is the essence of Xian Dao. Obtain from the noble, do not wait for the power of the yellow axe. The body is rich, do not need the rare goods. Too high to be climbed, too deep to be fathomed. Riding on the flowing light, driving the flying scenery, penetrating the sixth void, penetrating the cold. Beyond the supreme, into the supreme. The tour guide sitting at the front did not seem to notice Wu Lian's sudden action at all. He still closed his eyes and continued to recite to himself. The onlookers did not know the truth. They only felt that this person's behavior was a little strange, so they used their mobile phones to record the entire process of him preaching. Back off, back off. Stop taking pictures. We are carrying out a special mission. Please cooperate with us. Thank you. After all, this incident happened under the Tower of Tiananmen. The operation members did not dare to forcibly break the array, so they could only temporarily drive the onlookers away from the scene. Hey! What are you doing? Why are you pushing me? Which department are you from? How would I know who you are without a uniform? I'm telling you, you better show some respect. I'm not leaving. What can you do about it? Come on, come hit me. Wu Lian wanted to clear the area, but the onlookers did not agree. The elderly tour group in front of them did not kill anyone, and they did not set off any fire. What was wrong with them sitting there silently and watching from the side? Was it illegal to sit still? Was it illegal to watch from the side? Wang Chuanju had thought of everything, but she did not expect. I've done what I have to do. I'll go with you now. As soon as the middle-aged man finished speaking, the elders behind him all stood up from the ground and quickly walked to his side. From the looks of it, these old people in their 70s and 80s seemed to be following the lead of this middle-aged man. Seeing this, the operation personnel could not help but look at each other, as if they could not understand the actions of the person in front of them. There are too many people here. Hurry up and take them away. After the middle-aged man surrendered, the supervisor quickly rushed down from the tower. For the sake of safety, the supervisor signaled for the operation personnel to handcuff all the old people in front of him. Regarding this, the middle-aged man in the lead seemed to be quite dissatisfied. Thus, he went directly to the supervisor and pleaded for these old people. These old people have only been cultivating with me for a short period of time. Today, they are only here to cheer for me. May I ask what crime they have committed? If you insist on denouncing them, then go ahead and take me back. This has nothing to do with them. Don't worry if I really want to cause trouble. Today I won't preach here, and I won't surrender without a fight. Hearing this, the supervisor had no choice but to take a serious look at the person in front of him. To be honest, if he really had to forcibly take these old people away in front of all the tourists present, there might be some bizarre negative news on the internet tomorrow. And according to the information that Wu Lian had received before, the instigator of everything today seemed to be this middle-aged man in front of him. Therefore, after hearing the middle-aged man's words, the supervisor immediately walked to the side. After a short discussion with the higher-ups, The final decision was made. Take this person back. The others go to the side and register in order. If there are no problems, let them go. The middle-aged man seemed to be very satisfied with this arrangement. Thus he turned around and whispered some instructions to the old people. Then he took the initiative to follow the supervisor into a bus not far away. Throughout the entire process, the old people present did not say a word. They all seemed to listen to the middle-aged man in front of them. Therefore, after the middle-aged man was taken away by Wu Lian, only a few old people could not suppress the sadness in their hearts and silently shed tears. On the bus, as usual, Wu Lian began to interrogate the middle-aged man. What's your name? Where are you from? Do you know what you've done today? Wu Lian had to treat this celestial being with caution. Therefore, once the man got on the bus, the operation personnel handcuffed him with special stainless steel handcuffs. My Taoist name is Yujing. Since I was born in Wuxia, then I'm from Wuxia. Is that how you answer? Speak human language. And when cultivators possess such strength, who could guarantee that? Could they be like Qin Shi, who stayed at home all day, taking care of their children and playing with their cats? One person could destroy a city. One person was enough to overturn a country. Although the world is big, I am the law. Where could they not go? Who did they not dare to kill? Therefore, 2 years ago, Wu Lian confirmed that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was beginning to recover, and that the ancient legacies were beginning to show signs of emerging. Together with the military, they came up with the first 5-year plan. Within 5 years, Wu Lian would do everything in his power to cultivate as many cultivators as possible who were loyal to the motherland. These cultivators, who were personally trained by Wu Lian, were one of the important pillars that Wu Lian would rely on to maintain the security of Wuxia in the future. In addition, Wu Lian strengthened their control over the cultivation world. For the cultivation legacies that had existed long before the spiritual qi recovery, Wu Lian mainly used coercion and enticement. While promising them all kinds of benefits, they also threatened them with nuclear bombs. Either they joined the Wu Lian, or they waited for the nuclear bomb to be leveled. There was no room for negotiation. Otherwise, as time went on, once an existence that even nuclear weapons could not destroy appeared, Wu Lian would have to pay more than 100 times the price if they wanted to restrain these people. Using thunderous means to show the kindness of a bodhisattva. The Wu Lian was a powerful weapon of the country, not a dictatorial force. Since they could obtain all kinds of benefits out of thin air if they joined, even the most noble cultivator would think twice before refusing. Moreover, even a 1,000-year-old turtle like Jiang Yin was willing to join. In fact, it already showed that joining the Wu Lian was definitely a very wise decision. Therefore, after the first 5-year plan was proposed, Wu Lian successfully gathered most of the cultivation legacies in Wuxia. The plan went smoothly. In fact, as long as the first 5-year plan was successfully achieved, Wu Lian would consider opening the cultivation legacies to the public and take the initiative to take responsibility for promoting the development of the cultivation world. But it was a pity. Not everyone could think from the perspective of the country. Therefore, no matter how good Wu Lian's plan was, it could not win everyone's approval. When the forest was big, there were naturally all kinds of birds. Perhaps these cultivators did not recognize their national identity from the beginning to the end. Although they were born and raised in Wuxia, they did not have the concept of a country in their hearts, so they could not understand the Wu Lian's actions. In ancient times there was no Wu Lian, but everyone cultivated well. However, Qin speculated that this set of cultivation method should not be able to sell many copies. Because it was incomplete, if he cultivated according to this cultivation method, he could only reach the peak of the qi refining stage at most. He was still thousands of miles away from the foundation establishment stage. However, what Qin did not expect was, up until now, The number of people who had bought this cultivation method had far exceeded the range he could imagine. Chen Shi underestimated the attractiveness of cultivation methods to ordinary people. At the same time, he also underestimated the desire of foreigners for the inheritance of Wuxia. If it were not for the Wu Lian holding the fort outside, almost turning Wuxia into an iron bucket, there would have been assassins rushing into Wuxia with large-caliber sniper rifles to search for the ancient inheritance in the famous mountains and rivers. In this world, there were too few ancient inheritances as strong as Daiyu Island. More of them were individual cultivators like Yu Jingzi. Was the foundation establishment stage weak? That was equivalent to Chen Shi's point of view. For ordinary people, the foundation establishment stage was second only to the celestial beings. Even according to Wu Lian's strength evaluation standards, the foundation establishment stage was at least an A-level expert. What did this mean? A mere incomplete cultivation method could make an ordinary person become an A-level expert. Now it was only selling for 5 million. Was it too expensive? Of course it was not. Therefore, when the farce of Yu Jingzi preaching in front of Tiananmen Square broke out, the whole world was in an uproar. It had to be said that the Wu Lian had really put in a lot of effort to maintain the security of Wuxia. No wonder there had been less and less news coming from abroad in recent years. It turned out that the Wu Lian had blocked all of it in advance. Even so, if the situation continued to develop at this rate, it wouldn't be long before Wuxia would once again bring out the policy of seclusion, until the Wu Alliance completed the first 5-year plan. Other than trading, the most practical function of the dark web was intelligence and information exchange. This was the world's largest cultivator forum, and also the world's largest news website. Chen Shi browsed through the news channel, and found that it was all about cultivators. For example, a knight commander of the Knights Templar had a fight with a Brahmin boss some time ago. Or a high-ranking member of Yinyang Liao had a fight with a white-robed wizard of the Sorcerers Association. If the two sides fought in public, the website would even list the actual combat videos. This is interesting. I wonder if my name is on it. Let's search. Chen Shi seemed to have opened the door to a new world. He did not do anything for the whole day. Even if Chen Shi was not included, Jiang Yan should still be number 1 on the heaven leaderboard. How could an ordinary person compare to an old tortoise that had lived for over 1,000 years? Thus, it was fine to just take a look at this list, but one must not take it seriously. Lin Tingfeng? First on the heaven leaderboard? Although Chen Shi didn't really care about this list, he still subconsciously clicked on the detailed introduction of the number 1 on the heaven leaderboard. It was just like how everyone knew that the world's highest peak was Mount Everest, but very few people knew that the world's second highest peak was Chogori Peak. This was human nature, and Chen Shi was no exception. Therefore, the number 1 on the heaven leaderboard was really quite eye-catching. As the current number 1 on the heaven leaderboard, Lin Tingfeng was not only one of the founders of the Wu Lian, but also one of the 3 divine pillars of Wuxia. The so-called 3 divine pillars were actually the 3 giants of the Wu Lian. One had to know that long before Chen Shi returned to Earth, the 3 divine pillars were already famous all over the world. If the 3 divine pillars could forcefully cultivate to the heavenly man level when spirit chi was exhausted, one could imagine how outstanding their talents were. Now that spirit chi had begun to recover, there might not be many changes in a short period of time. However, as time passed, the most outstanding among them would naturally be able to stand out from the vast masses. At this point, it was necessary to mention a classic biological term, which was catch-up growth. At the same time, it was also known as compensatory growth. If Chen Shi guessed correctly, Earth should be in the catch-up stage now. After all, how powerful was Earth in ancient times? Because of the exhaustion of spirit chi, Earth had completely become what people called the Tianshu ruins. Therefore, once spirit chi on Earth began to recover, it would inevitably lead to an almost abnormal increase in the strength of cultivators. At present, the powerhouses on the heaven leaderboard were mainly concentrated in the heavenly man level, which was the level above the foundation establishment level and below the golden core level. If things continued to develop according to the current momentum, within 10 years, there should be someone who could take the lead in breaking through the golden core level and officially step into the yuanying stage. Yuanying. What kind of concept was that? At that time, the Earth should also show a different appearance, right? She stood from the perspective of a bystander and roughly deduced the changes of Earth's future. Then he suddenly thought of a very serious problem. 10 years later, Earth would no longer be the stage for him, the great Supreme Chun. It would be Nian's turn to shine. Chapter 534. Presumably, every parent knew that their children changed their clothes very quickly. Although Nian had not yet entered puberty, her height was still steadily increasing at a rate of 5 centimeters per year. Just after her 9th birthday, Nian's height had already reached 135 centimeters, so even if she skipped 2 grades, she was not considered too short in the 6th grade. Her height was growing very quickly, so naturally, she was wearing more and more clothes. Little brat. No, she should be called a little brat now. Perhaps she inherited her mother's aesthetic preference. So Nian was now more and more fond of wearing plain colors and simpler styles. Those colorful princess dresses had actually disappeared from her wardrobe for a long time. Qin Ruoying's face shape leaned towards an oval face. Since Nian inherited all of her mother's advantages, now that she was 9 years old, her face naturally lost some of the baby fat that was unique to children. Instead, she had a trace of a young girl's bright appearance. She was wearing a pure white dress with a simple ponytail on her head, coupled with her big bright eyes and the smile that was always on her face. If she put on some light makeup, she could simply be a Taobao children's clothing model. Hello, children's clothing model? But then again, it didn't seem like a good thing for a girl to be too beautiful. For example, Chunxi's mood was very complicated now. From the perspective of a father, Chunxi naturally hoped that his daughter was as beautiful as possible. But when his daughter really grew up, there would be passers-by who couldn't help but pick up their phones to secretly take pictures every day. Chunxi's mood became heavier and heavier. The cabbage at home was becoming more and more beautiful. What should he do in the future? In a blink of an eye, he was surrounded by little pigs waiting to be fed. He almost wanted to rush into his vegetable garden and eat this cabbage on the spot. Nian was only 9 years old. How could a 9-year-old child not look good? Don't you know that a girl changes 18 times between childhood and womanhood? He didn't even let go of such a young child. What a beast. When Nian really entered puberty and the secondary sexual characteristics appeared, Chunxi's worries would be a few hundred times greater than now. Compared to when she was 7 years old, Nian's mind was becoming more active, and her ability to express herself was also becoming stronger. Therefore, she was now speaking one sentence after another. She truly had the temperament of a leader. In school, she was the class monitor, a good student, and also the leader of the young pioneers. Different from many of the children of officials, these honors were fought for by her own performance, so not only was Nian famous in class, but she was also somewhat famous in school. If it wasn't for her young age, some precocious child would have made her the school belle. She was already a combination of wisdom and beauty, and if she added her omnipotent father into the mix, with such excellent conditions, it was unknown if there was anyone in this world who was worthy of her. So don't look at how Chunxi was worried that his daughter was too popular. Maybe in another 20 years he, as a father, would have to personally travel thousands of miles in the divine continent, just to find a good partner for his daughter. Today's entertainment was horse riding. It wasn't the kind of wild horses that galloped recklessly on the prairie, but professional horse racing in the International Equestrian School. So, after Chunxi let Nian go back to the room to change her clothes, the father and daughter were ready to set off. Here was something that needed to be mentioned. After 2 years of hard work, Qin Ruoying's cultivation had finally reached the peak of the celestial being realm. Currently, she was at the stage where she could break through at any time. So during this period of time, Qin Ruoying didn't attend the family gatherings. Instead, like Qin Xueqing and Qin Yongwang, she shut herself in her room all day long. This was the daily life of a cultivator. Other than cultivation, there was only cultivation. Unless she reached Chunxi's realm, she still had a long way to go before she could go into seclusion. Nian seemed to have gotten used to Qin Ruoying's recent seclusion. So, after shouting from outside the door, she skipped to Chunxi's side. Then, she held on to Chunxi's arm and directly walked out of the courtyard. Dad, didn't you buy 4 lessons for me last time? I still have 2 lessons to attend. How about we come back later today and attend the remaining 2 lessons together? Okay, then we can only eat outside today. Later on, you can't be picky about your food. As he spoke, Chunxi smiled and pinched her face. This child's mouth had already been spoiled by him. Now, she basically didn't eat outside food, so he had to give her a heads up in advance. Okay, I'm not picky about my food. Perhaps it was because she had ridden a big cat when she was young. Ever since Chunxi took her to the racetrack, this little girl was completely infatuated with riding horses. Unfortunately, the land in Shangjing was too expensive. It was impossible to open a racetrack in the core city. So no matter how much she liked it, Chunxi couldn't take her to ride horses every day. The father and daughter chatted and laughed as they walked out of the gate of drooping flowers in large strides. But at this moment, all of a sudden, a strong demonic wind blew in the courtyard. It was clearly a bright and sunny morning, but the demonic wind in the courtyard was blowing so loudly that Nian couldn't open her eyes. Dad, is it going to rain? The little girl seemed to be frightened by the sudden demonic wind. Chapter 535. The atmosphere in the courtyard was a little awkward. In the face of Qin Xueqing's sudden accusation, Chunxi was stunned for a moment. Then he pretended to be surprised and asked, "What did I lie to you about?" After hearing Chunxi's self-righteous question, Qin Xueqing became even angrier. She frowned and opened her mouth slightly as if she wanted to say something, but Chunxi didn't give her the chance. Before she could open her mouth again, Chunxi's side was like a string of cannons. Her mouth kept rattling. "Say we are relatives now. Can you not measure the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain? Didn't you practice the great wilderness physical exercise technique well? Why don't you recognize me now? Look at you now. Ice skin, jade bones, and jade body are at the initial stage. You can block the attack of an ordinary Dharma treasure with just your physical body. What else are you not satisfied with? If you're still not satisfied, you can continue to practice. When you practice this technique to the highest level, you might be able to shatter the void with your physical body and step into the void realm in a whole new way." Looking at Chunxi's serious expression, those who didn't know would think that Qin Xueqing really took advantage of him. In fact, wasn't this cultivation method the same one he had given to the big cat before? What needed to be mentioned here was, whether it was Tianshu, Tianxian, or Taiwei enclosure, the cultivation system in these places was mainly qi refinement. It was the most orthodox cultivation system known to immortal cultivators, which was the immortal cultivation method. However, with Chunxi's current experience, although the orthodox cultivation system was complete and strong, it didn't mean that other cultivation systems were necessarily weak. They were even regarded as wrong paths by others. For example, the martial arts that Qin Xueqing was learning now, or the magic and witchcraft on Earth, or even the deformed children that evolved from necromancers like the Onmyoji. The end of the qi refinement method was the immortal emperor. Then, what was the end of the body refinement method? The reason why people couldn't see the end was because they hadn't found the path to the end. Cultivation methods were dead, but people were alive. The universe was vast and boundless. Who could be sure that the other cultivation holy lands would focus on qi refinement? Therefore, in the end it was still the same old saying. The great Tao flowed like mercury, and every grain was round. Therefore, Chunxi never asked about his sister-in-law's cultivation method. Since she liked to practice like this, then he would let her practice on her own. As her brother-in-law, the most he could do was give her some help from the side. For example, he could provide her with the Great Desolation body tempering technique and use it as inspiration. Perhaps it was because the big cat was a monster, so even after cultivating for so long, it was still stuck at the initial stage. On the other hand, after Qin Shueqing obtained the Great Desolation body forging technique, she was able to completely complete the first stage of transformation within a short span of 2 years. From then on, she became a true body cultivator. The Great Desolation body forging technique was found by Chunxi in the Sky Yin Divine Sex Library. This was an incomplete body tempering technique, so Chunxi didn't want to give this technique to Qin Shueqing. The reason why he changed his mind and took the initiative to pass this technique to Qin Shueqing was mainly because Chenghua and Yiji, these two brats, didn't keep their promises. They used their mother's birthday as an excuse to gain sympathy. They said that they would be back in 7 days, but in the end, it had been 2 years. They hadn't returned for 2 whole years. Great Sovereign Chen didn't even have enough time to make his children happy, so how could he really run to the Supreme Palace enclosure to catch them? As the saying goes, revenge is a dish best served cold. Chunxi wasn't anxious at all, but his sister-in-law couldn't sit still anymore. They said that it would be 7 days, but it was delayed again and again. 1 month wasn't enough, so they waited for another 2 months. 2 months had passed, but Chenghua and Yiji still didn't show any signs of showing up. His sister-in-law couldn't wait any longer, so she kept saying that she wanted to go to the Supreme Palace enclosure, and that she had to personally catch those 2 brats. How could Chunxi agree to her going to the Supreme Palace enclosure when he saw her being so impatient? What if she was captured by the Xianyuan family or Jade Clear Paradise before they were caught? At that time, wouldn't Great Sovereign Chen have to personally make a trip? Chunxi obviously wouldn't do this kind of loss-making business. So he used the Great Desolation body forging technique as bait, and after some careful guidance, he successfully lured his sister-in-law into a death seclusion. This time, his ears were finally clear. Chunxi originally planned to wait until Nian came of age, then bring his family to the Supreme Palace enclosure for a tour, and then catch those 2 brats. Who would have thought that Qin Shueqing's talent was actually so outstanding? In a short 2 years' time, she had successfully mastered the Great Desolation body forging technique. Although it was only the first stage, but to Qin Shueqing, this was a brand new beginning. Now that Qin Shueqing had come out of seclusion, it actually meant that Chunxi must give her a satisfactory explanation today. Either he went or she went. Anyway, one of them had to go. This was his sister-in-law's character. If there's something to say, say it. If there's nothing to say, don't find trouble. Since Chenghua and Yiji said that they would come back, then they must come back. Qin Shueqing could forgive their previous mistakes, but she absolutely couldn't tolerate being played and fooled like this. Hence, no matter what Chunxi said now, his sister-in-law only looked at him coldly. Chunxi was stunned by her stare, and in the end he really didn't know what to say, so he spread his hands and asked helplessly, "Say it, what exactly do you want?" "Lend me a Xing Cha. I'll go by myself." His sister-in-law was rather straightforward. She didn't want to listen to Chunxi's excuses anymore, and didn't want to waste any more time, so the best way was for her to personally make a trip to the Supreme Palace enclosure. Chunxi had long expected that she would say this. Hence, after seriously sizing up Qin Shueqing, he kept the smile on his face, and asked seriously, "Have you thought it through? That place isn't Earth. Once you meet with any danger, even I won't be able to rush over to save you immediately." Not sure if it was because Chunxi had long regarded Qin Shueqing as his family, so he really didn't want Qin Shueqing to go to the Supreme Palace enclosure alone. It was a very strange feeling. Just like when Nian suddenly said that she wanted to go out to play alone. How could Chunxi, as her father, be at ease? But what could he do even if he was worried? How could Chunxi not know his sister-in-law's character? "I've thought it through. This trip is not only to seek revenge but also to go out and travel. Although I'm not as strong as you, I'm not a lamb to be slaughtered by others. It's fine if I didn't know about the Supreme Palace enclosure before, but now that I know, how can I continue to live under this blue sky? The universe is so big, I also want to see it." Speaking of this, Qin Shueqing suddenly paused, and then looked up at the blue sky above her head with a yearning expression. It was still that beautiful blue sky and white clouds, but her line of sight seemed to have penetrated the clouds, crossed the boundless void, and reached the other end of the universe. That's right, with her strong character. How could she not yearn for the colorful depths of the universe? And this was obviously her sister-in-law's true thoughts deep in her heart. Don't worry, I know you're doing this for my own good. Chapter 536. I know you are doing this for my own good. Maybe it was the reluctance to part. So Qin Xueqing's face showed a gentle and sweet smile for the first time. She stood in the middle of the yard, but Yingying's smile gave people a warm feeling like the winter snow had melted and spring had returned. Seeing this, Chunxi couldn't help but show an expression like he had seen a ghost. After Qin Xueqing saw his expression, she seemed to suddenly think of something, and a blush suddenly flew on her face. I didn't expect this. The sister-in-law who had always considered herself a tigress actually showed such a shy little girl's attitude in private. Looking at her shy and charming face, people who didn't know would probably think that she had mistakenly eaten some kind of indescribable medicine. With Chunxi's understanding of Qin Xueqing, if the atmosphere continued to be awkward at this time, this girl might turn hostile on the spot. Therefore, Chunxi didn't say anything more. After a light cough, he took out something from his arms and handed it to Qin Xueqing. This was Chenghua's Sumeru mustard seed bag, but it was already his. In addition to a xingcha that was improved by Chunxi, there were also the spirit stones left by Yiji, as well as some defensive magic weapons and medicinal materials. For Chunxi, these things were not valuable at all, and they were not even as practical as yuan. But for Qin Xueqing, these things were like the novice equipment that came with the system, and they were also necessary for her to enter the martial arts world. The imprint of these things has been erased by me. As long as you drip a drop of blood on them, you can use them freely. The journey to the Supreme Palace enclosure is long. Once you encounter any danger, even I can't come to save you immediately, so you have to remember that you must be careful on this trip. When I went to the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, I'd made a few friends there. If you really encounter any danger, then it's best that you don't try to be brave and directly report my name. Perhaps you'll be able to scare them. By the way, aren't the first and second on the Heaven Leaderboard members from Wulian? Why don't you bring them with you? Isn't it better to have more people to take care of one another? Chunxi was like a parent who was about to send his child off to a faraway journey. After Qin Wanqing heard this, she didn't interrupt him coldly. Instead, she stood silently to the side and listened carefully to every word Chunxi said. I have a jade pendant here. Take it as well. Remember to wear it on your body. This thing was originally prepared for Nianyan, but she can't use it for the time being. Since you're going so far away, I'll give it to you to protect yourself first. But you must remember, this jade pendant can only be used 3 times. After 3 times, it will completely lose its effect. So when you encounter danger, you must escape as soon as possible. As he spoke, Chunxi took out a unique jade pendant from his bosom. It was no wonder that Chunxi was so long-winded today. After all, he knew Qin Xueqing's character too well. If he didn't repeatedly emphasize in advance, with her previous behavior, she definitely wouldn't care whether the person standing opposite her was a celestial venerable or a supreme venerable. In short, she would just bite the bullet and do it. It had to be said that for this stubborn sister-in-law of his, Chunxi's stubbornness really broke his heart. In the end, Qin Xueqing still left. Other than Chunxi, no one knew that she flew into outer space alone just like that. Nianyan didn't know what her father and aunt were talking about in the courtyard. She was focused on the racecourse, so when Chunxi finally crossed the Chuehua gate with an umbrella, the little girl hurriedly pulled Chunxi and was about to leave. After being delayed by Qin Xueqing, it was already 10 o'clock in the morning. The racecourse was outside the 4th Ring Road. Even if there was no traffic, it would take nearly an hour to run. So Chunxi didn't take the bus with Nianyan. Instead, he took out his phone and called for a Didi taxi. The father and daughter stood by the roadside, bored to death, waiting for a taxi. At this time, a girl with a lot of flyers in her hand suddenly came to them. Hello sir, your daughter is so cute. I wonder if you have signed her up for a martial arts training class? Hearing this, Chunxi turned his head and looked at the girl. She was about 18 or 19 years old. She should be a part-time college student. Sorry, she's not interested in these. Chunxi politely refused. However, the girl saw that Nian didn't participate in any martial arts training class, so she mustered up the courage and continued to introduce to Chunxi, "Sir, it's like this. Our martial arts training class has just opened and is currently holding a membership top-up event. Your daughter should still be in elementary school, right? Her age is a good time to learn martial arts. Do you want to know more about it? Our martial arts training class has a strong teaching staff. The head coach has won a national competition. If you send your daughter to our class, she will definitely become a qualified martial artist in the future. Sorry, we're really not interested." "Oh, okay, sorry to bother you." The girl left with a disappointed face. From beginning to end, Nian didn't say a word because she was already used to it. Just like the popular swimming and fitness 2 years ago, for some reason, there was a sudden martial arts craze in the country in the past 2 years. With the slogan of strengthening the body and retaining one's youth, this martial arts craze was extremely fierce. After Chun-Shi took her to experience riding a horse, the little girl was completely infatuated with horsemanship. As a standard in Western aristocratic schools, equestrian skills might be slightly different from what ordinary people imagined. It was the only event in the Olympic Games where men and women competed on the same field, so many children from rich families abroad began to learn horsemanship when they were young. Just like a European proverb says, "Those who can ride horses are not necessarily nobles, but nobles certainly can ride horses." As more and more Wuxia people went to study in British aristocratic schools, this trend naturally spread to Wuxia as well. Nobles, of course, had to be particular. A helmet, gloves, riding boots, breeches, charbus, and a protective vest were all indispensable. It was as if without it, it could no longer be called an international equestrian skill, but a traditional equestrian sport in Wuxia. Therefore, when Nian just signed up, the staff of the equestrian club persuaded her to buy a set of equipment. Although Chun-Shi was not very interested in these things, because Nian wanted to learn, he paid the money quickly and bought 16 classes at one time. Since this thing was called an aristocratic sport, the charging standard naturally had to be according to the aristocratic standard. A 45-minute class cost 800 yuan, and the coach had to charge extra. But even so, when Chun-Shi came to the club with Nian, the race course was still crowded with children practicing. Although many of the children were just individual customers who bought in a group, but it should be known that children also had vanity. Therefore, after experiencing such high-end extracurricular training like horsemanship once, these children would usually be like Nian, clamoring for their parents to pay for the class. If the child liked it, then buy it. Although it was a little painful, it was not unbearable. In fact, the reason why many parents agreed to let their children learn horsemanship was that they actually had their own calculations in mind. Children from ordinary families certainly had no way to come into contact with children from rich families. In order to let their children come into contact with a higher social circle, the equestrian club was obviously a very good platform. After all, whether a family was rich or not, one only needed to look at the children's clothes to know. Children from ordinary families would definitely only wear the free clothes provided by the club. Only the truly wealthy families would buy their own equestrian outfits for their children. Nian's appearance was already outstanding, so when she changed into her equestrian clothes and came to the lounge to wait for the staff to arrange the horse, several parents could not help but whisper to each other. Children were not so calculative. She sat on the horse in a daze, and before she could react, the coach beside her hurriedly came to her side and signaled for her to come down quickly. "I'm not coming down. Seeing that the coach seemed to want to forcefully carry her down, Nian was a little unhappy. She immediately pouted, turned her head and shouted at Qinshi. Dad, I haven't played enough. Can you let me play for a while more? Children did not understand the filth between adults. She had not played enough, so of course she would stay on the horse and refuse to come down. For a moment, the situation was a little awkward. Seeing that Nian still refused to come down, the little girl by the railing suddenly blushed, as if she had been provoked by something, and could not help but burst into tears. Mom, outside the racecourse. The little girl wailed loudly. Seeing her so pitiful and helpless, Qinshi could not bear to see her like this. Hence, he did not spoil Nian anymore, and directly went forward to carry Nian down from the horse. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.